Chapter 1627. The Stairway of Madness. When Duque and his entourage entered this area in Otter, they did not know how to describe this place. The surrounding scenery was similar to the Guardian's Shrine District. It was still a gigantic palace built with giants as the standard. Everyone was here to slay the evil god. When they saw the gigantic Greek pillar that required dozens of people to wrap their arms around it, they had already gotten used to it. The shrine was still the same shrine, but the aura and atmosphere in the air were completely different. Everyone thought that this place would feel like Angela or the Hacker Shrine, filled with traces of worship for the evil god. Who would have thought that it was not like that at all? The surroundings were filled with a transparent aura, spreading a slight sense of joy. This feeling was very faint, so faint that it was almost undetectable. However, Duque was very cautious. As a transmigrator, he had seen countless horror films, and was well versed in the success of horror films. If the opening scene was filled with the terrifying atmosphere of death, then the horror film was destined to fail at the box office. From normal to terrifying, it was a single portion. From happiness to terror and despair, it was not a double portion, but 4 or even 10 times the impact. This was the psychological difference from heaven to hell. Therefore, the Pest's rule was to first create a joyous and peaceful atmosphere. Duque looked around. He thought that someone would notice it. Who knew that the calm wise ones did not see a single one? But the hoof in the middle of the waves did. La 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 la. Imriel skipped forward in a relaxed and joyful manner. That special slightly crooked S-shaped leg was like a small spring. Its light posture reminded Duque of a primary school student carrying a small backpack to school on his first day. When worn on a hoof, it was like, I didn't take my medicine today. I feel cute. What the hell is cute? Duque was annoyed. Duque was furious. Without another word, he went up and grabbed the hoof's little tail that was swinging around. Ah! The hoof cried out in shock. Then Duque gave its but a flying kick, and it almost fell flat on its face. Duque, what are you doing? He didn't call Duque by his title. His hoof had improved. If he called Duque Commander, that would be fair to fair. Shadan, there's something wrong with the air. The moment Duque's voice fell, the experts of the Alliance all reacted in unison. Magni and the other scientists immediately took out gas masks from their storage space bags. Jaina had already activated Frost Barrier. In one breath, she expanded the barrier by 100 times, enveloping the entire Alliance hero group. She was already a breaking dawn, so this wasn't too much of a burden. Duque shook his head and said with a frown, No, stop all of them. These things are useless. What I mean is that there's a strange spiritual energy in the surrounding air. Magni put away his gas mask, and Gianna retracted her shield. Ha! Thean and the others didn't understand. Do a lot of people feel a little happy and delighted? A little. Everyone thought about it. The calmer and more determined a person is, the less likely they are to be influenced. Everyone understood what Duque was trying to say. I don't get it. Magni said with a frown. Thean Gavinrad, Merid Riadaline, and Imriel are all holy knights. The other 4 don't feel anything. Even if they don't believe in the holy light, they only feel a little excited. Why is it only Imriel? Imriel also seemed to realize that she was wrong. She covered her butt, and stood there like she was wronged. She didn't dare to complain about Duque kicking her butt. Duque pressed a hand on Imriel's head. Didn't you notice? This fellow is the youngest. When Duque said the answer, Alicia and Kalia felt like arrows were shot in their hearts. From the perspective of humans, the elves and dwarves present were most likely old demons. In terms of age, these human females were all aunties. However, after gaining immortality, they ignored the age limit. Eternally 18, eternally beautiful like a flower. Even if the age of one's body was fixed, the gradual increase in age and experience would ultimately make one more mature. Hoof was the only one. Although she was already the leader deep down, she was still a real girl. Duque suddenly felt a little envious of the Drenii. Their bodies grew up very early, and then it was an extremely long period of youth. When they finally died of old age, their bodies would rapidly deteriorate. Coupled with their amazing magic and combat talents, they were a natural-born warrior race. Duque looked at the aggrieved Hoof and sighed. At least he comforted her. It's okay. It's not a fault to be young, and none of us are against you. It's just that when we fight Yogg-Saron, anyone who is not strong-willed or has a gap in their heart may be targeted by Yogg-Saron. Perhaps when they are under mental attack, they will do a lot of shameful things. When that time comes, please forgive them. Merritt walked up and bowed deeply to Duque with his burly body. Thank you for the reminder, Lord Commander. It's better to make a small mistake now than to make a fatal mistake when facing a strong enemy later. Our leader is young and impulsive and needs your care and guidance. With that, he almost pressed down on the hoof's head and bowed to Duque again. The hoof was aggrieved, but did as he was told. There was no helping it. Merritt was appointed by Valen as the Minister of Orders and was responsible for guiding and supervising her. Merritt would never argue with the hoof over the big issues, but he would firmly punish her when she occasionally went off the track. The hoof was a little afraid of Merritt. On the surface, Duque accepted Merritt's gratitude calmly. He was also very satisfied with the effect of making an example out of Merritt, but on the inside, he was a little pained. I'm not afraid of anything happening to the hoof, but I'm afraid of something happening to me. Duque was not afraid of simple head-on actions, but the mental attack of an ancient god and whatnot, it should be fine. After a little mobilization, everyone finally passed through the hall that was supposed to be General Vezek's stronghold, and arrived at the top of the Stairway of Madness, the greatest temple of terror in Otter. There was no sign of Yogg-Saron in the huge arched temple that could fit several football fields. Everyone's eyes were on the Vrykul woman of unknown origin in the middle of the temple hall. It was a beautiful woman wearing a dark yellow shirt that exposed her navel and a dark green dress. Under his dark brown hair was a simple silver hairband, which served as a foil to his upright and handsome face. Since she was a Vrykul with a quasi-giant body, she was naturally not a pretty girl. She was at least 3 meters tall. Who was she? Chapter 1628. She calls herself Sala. She's the messenger of Yogg-Saron's will. She once claimed to be the so-called Master's messenger. Freya, the guardian of the Church of Life, said through gritted teeth. Yogg-Saron's brainwashing was perfect. Even the memories of being enslaved still echoed clearly in the minds of the guardians. This was definitely a stain that they would never be able to erase for the rest of their lives. If it wasn't for the duty that was much more important than their own lives and their souls, there might really be some guardians who would choose to commit suicide to wash away their stain. Freya's words had angered Hodier and Mimiron. The chill around Hodier's body suddenly increased. Mimiron was even more direct. His huge robot had already begun charging. Even 100 meters away, one could clearly hear the mechanical sound of gears turning from slow to fast and accelerating. You traitors! How dare you come back? Didn't I ask you to guard this great temple? Sala spoke in a majestic female voice. It was quite uncomfortable to the ears of Duque and the others, like a male duck preparing to give a concert. For Freya and the others, it was a slap in the face. Hodier took a step forward, his voice like thunder. We are the servants of the great Pantheon Titan, not the slaves of your dirty and disgusting master. We will make Yogg-Saron pay the price. This is none of your business. Get Yogg-Saron out. Ha ha ha. Sala let out a rough laugh. Lowly slaves of the Pantheon. Whose slaves do you think aren't slaves? You used to be my slaves. Even if you break free for a while. Even if you bring companions who think they are strong. But I want to tell you, you and your companions will all become my slaves. Ha 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 ha. She actually used I to address them? Could she be? Duque's face was as dark as water. Yes. Everyone, don't be careless. This woman named Sala is the incarnation of the ancient evil god Yogg-Saron. No one knew how powerful the incarnation of an evil god was. Presumably, the guardians wouldn't mind beating her up as Yogg-Saron. Accept your punishment, evil god's incarnation. The most irascible thunder guardian Torim was the first to speak. At this moment, he had transformed into the god of hammers. He took the lead and raised the hammer that was filled with dazzling lightning. With a leap slash, he smashed the hammer into the ground. Don't! Duque reached out to stop Torim, but he had only said one word when Torim jumped over him. F***ck. At this moment, Sarah was invincible. Impulsiveness is the devil. In fact, it wasn't just Duque. Freya and the other two guardians had also noticed the problem. That tiny incarnation of Yogg-Saron seemed to be right in the middle of his field of vision. But in fact, she did not exist in this hall at all. She was more like a projection that existed between reality and illusion. What's the use of you, Taurine, directly using your ultimate move? Only Duque knew that Taurine's actions were not only useless, but they were also more of a hindrance. With Sarah as the center of the battlefield, there were 5 green clouds from near to far, revolving around Sarah in concentric circles. At first glance, there was nothing special about these clouds. Only those with enough eyesight would realize that these were the exits of the 5 space passages. Taurine, be careful. Your existence will serve as a spatial marker for those clouds. It will trigger more servants of the evil god to enter this world. According to Duque's experience in the game, without Taurine's interference, these green clouds would naturally produce Yogg-Saron guardians. At first, it would take about 30 seconds for one to appear. As time passed, the interval would gradually shorten. In addition, players who stepped into the green clouds would immediately produce the next Yogg-Saron guardian. He did not know what would happen when a guardian like Taurine encountered the clouds. The answer would be revealed soon. Ha ha ha. Stupid guy, you're really only fit to be my slave. Along with Sarah's loud laughter, the 5 clouds that were originally only a meter in diameter expanded more than 10 times in an instant. From each cloud, a huge figure crawled out, and within a second, the body turned from a translucent illusory state to a solid state. They were 5 humanoid monsters that were at least 4 stories tall. They had purple skin and explosive muscles. Their bodies and lower limbs were still considered human, but their 2 arms were huge octopus tentacles, and their heads were unmistakably octopus heads. Even their chins were a few small tentacles that were constantly twisting. Duque's eyes narrowed into slits. Others might not know, but Duque knew very well that these were all commander-level monsters modeled after the Herald Wolaz, who guarded the ancient kingdom of Ankak. Originally, Sarah could only summon deformed monsters like the Guardians, but because of Taurine's stupid teammate, he directly summoned a boss. Taurine, don't touch those clouds. Also, you deal with the monsters that you created yourself. Duque yelled, based on the principle of cleaning up one's own mess. Duque was absolutely unwilling to let the Alliance's powerhouses take action. But before Duque's voice trailed off, something happened. Taurine had even lost his hammer. His eyes were red, and he covered his temples with both hands. The veins on his neck and face were bulging, and he looked like he was in pain. Ah no! You can't deceive me, Sif. Sif is dead. Duque's face darkened. Seeing this scene, of course, he knew that Taurine was under a mental attack. Yogg-Saron began to invade Taurine's mental world through illusions. A 10-story tall giant, not to mention going crazy, even a fart could shake the earth. Duque and the other little ones could only roll as far as possible to avoid being affected by Taurine, who was rolling on the ground. Freya's expression turned ugly. We're in big trouble. Yogg-Saron is familiar with our mental world. If we get too close, there's a higher chance that we'll be re-brainwashed and then controlled. It'll be faster than before. On the other side, Mimiren's huge robot had already popped out 2 palms as grappling claws, grabbed Taurine's shoulder, and dragged him towards the entrance of the hall. Freya summoned a cauldron the size of half a football field. Oh, it was a large well of wisdom. She tried her best to resist Yogg-Saron's mental invasion of Taurine. Taurine's veins had subsided quite a bit. As for his combat power, it seemed that he couldn't count on him too much. Taurine, you! Duque wanted to curse and give the word trash to this deceptive guardian. In the end, he could only sigh. Taurine, you're such a disgrace. Leave the group. Chapter 1629. Come to think of it, Taurine was not to be blamed. Yogg-Saron was not imprisoned in Otter for a day and a half, but for 25,000 years. There was no such thing as an absolutely perfect prison in the world. No matter how tightly sealed the cage was, there would always be a time when it was damaged and revealed a gap. As the saying goes, guard day and night. It is hard to guard against a thief in the family. After Loken was controlled and completely brainwashed to become a loyal servant of Yogg-Saron, The personalities and past history of the Guardians were no longer a secret. Personality determined fate. For an evil god who was good at mind control, mastering these was equivalent to mastering the key to controlling the Guardians. Without the help of outsiders like Duke, even the four Guardians, Torim, Hodier, Freya, and Mimiron, would have been completely brainwashed after being controlled by Yogg-Saron for a year and a half. In the end, they would have been beaten to death like how they dealt with Loken. Although the four Guardians were now awake, if they could be controlled once, they could be controlled a second time. With Yogg-Saron's familiarity, the second fall would be faster and deeper. Perhaps the second time would not be a simple beating that could wake them up. Sigh. Duque let out a long sigh, and his expression immediately changed to one of awe. Let's go. Behind Duque, a slim woman in red suddenly began to transform under Sala's gaze. In the short span of 2 breaths, he had transformed from a tiny human into a massive black dragon. Before the black dragon came over, she took a deep breath. There were so many fire elements in her lungs that even through the thick scales, muscles, and bones on her chest, one could clearly see the yellow radiance blooming inside. Deep breath. Blazing flames spewed out from her mouth and nose, looking like a sea of flames. Even the bravest faceless under Yogg-Saron did not dare to take such a terrifying heat head-on. Only the 3 faceless leaders were really unjustly attacked, and most of them chose to dodge. However, even with their arms covering their heads and half squatting to eat, the 3 did not die on the spot. Their arms were charred, sticky, and even their flesh had melted together. However, they did not seem to feel pain. When the power of deep breath weakened, they tore their own flesh and rushed towards Onyxia. However, no one noticed that unknowingly, no less than 8 faceless bosses had been separated by Onyxia's big move. Black Dragon Princess was not the slightest bit afraid of the faceless leader monsters. She let out a loud roar and twisted her body. Her 10-meter-long meteor hammer-shaped tail, with a terrifying spike at the end, swept across. Immediately, it displayed the momentum of sweeping away 1,000 troops. At least 4 faceless ones' leaders were affected. The first one didn't suffer a direct hit, but the third one was hit by the dragon's tail. His right chest and abdomen immediately became a bloody mess. Just because the first one didn't receive a direct hit didn't mean that it was fine. It was also swept away like a bowling ball. It was only at this moment that everyone was shocked to discover that the 4 fellows who had been swept had actually separated into 4 directions and thrown themselves out of the battle circle, rolling in front of the 4 great guardians. Holy shit! Amazing! Don't even think about slacking off today. Gavinrad smirked. At this time, everyone finally saw it. Onyxia, this seemingly fierce but actually a bit cowardly so-called guardian dragon, simply did not have the mind to fight with her life on the line. Her fighting style had always been from the heart. Well, all in all, it was cowardly, but she had thick skin and thick flesh. If she wasn't at the front, would it be Kalia holding a hammer and leading the charge? Therefore, with a big move, she directly scattered the opposite side, and then sat in a row to divide the fruits. Each guardian otter got a leader-level faceless one. Her subtext was clearly, "Didn't you say you can't get close to Yogg-Saron? Can't you just deal with its little brothers? Come, one each. Don't even think about taking a break." Freya was the first one to see through this trick. Being accused of slacking off in public was a disgrace for a guardian. The female giant's face was filled with shame and anger, but she couldn't do anything. The female giant fiercely stomped her foot, and the faceless one leader in front of her immediately trembled. The earth attribute attack of Tremor of Earth made the faceless one unable to stand steadily. "Come out, my ally!" Along with Freya's shout, 2 huge ancient trees lifted the solid bricks from the cracks in the floor tiles of the temple, stretched out their thick and powerful branches, and fiercely tied them up. Filthy creatures hiding in the depths of the earth. "Now, I will grant you the trial of light." Freya followed up with sunlight. The high temperature and heat of the resplendent sun was the most terrifying killing move for the faceless ones. A series of moves overflowing with murderous aura directly turned the faceless one's leader into a half-cripple. The guardian of the cold winter temple, Hodier, looked cold on the outside, but his heart was fiery. He first used freeze, to send out a cold breath to lock the struggling faceless one leader, and then used rapid freeze to trap half of the opponent's body in ice. Facing an opponent who stretched out his head like a mole but couldn't shrink back, he laughed and raised his huge hammer. The hammer's black hammer head was a bit like a large square wine cup, which constantly overflowed with an extremely cold breath. On the outside of the hammer head were 4 sharp ice thorns. When Hodier's ultimate skill Freezing Bash smashed down, a miraculous scene unfolded. The faceless one leader's head exploded like a rotten watermelon. All the flesh and blood splashed in all directions, but before they could fall to the ground, they were completely frozen in mid-air. As if showing off, Hodier deliberately left the powerful faceless one's body behind. Instead of completely destroying it, he threw it behind him. Perhaps he wanted to leave it for later to slowly watch. Tarim's thunder was the most violent and the simplest. It was an extremely exaggerated thunder that blasted an area the size of a basketball court into coke. As for the faceless one leader in the middle, what was that black thing? Think about it yourself. Among the 4 guardians, Mimiron was the most powerful. He first used his insanely ugly robot to fire a plasma cannon, killing the faceless one leader in front of him. Almost at the same time, P3WX2 laser barrage poured out. This extremely gorgeous laser beam was not something a mortal body could resist. Under this unreasonable laser barrage, the enemies in 2 basketball courts were swept clean. The 3 faceless one's leaders were first pierced by several extremely exaggerated laser beams. Then, the dozens of laser gun heads on the robot's arms turned, and the dense laser beams easily cut each leader's body into dozens of pieces of charred meat of different sizes. Chapter 1630. The 7 faceless leaders were killed almost at the same time. When they died, they were quite heroic, their entire bodies exploding in a very small area. Not only did flesh and blood splatter everywhere, but it also set off a strong shadow energy storm. It was a good thing that the Guardians were so powerful. However, Duque couldn't help but curse in his heart. Damn it! What the hell are you doing? Isn't this a trap? When Duke saw the mocking curve of Sarah's mouth that threatened to rise, he was angry. Yes, these faceless leaders looked very powerful, and the shadow energy fluctuations on their bodies were also amazing. If it was a 5-person elite team of professionals, it would take a lot of effort to deal with any one of them. But don't be mistaken, these guys were just cannon fodder. There were as many cannon fodder as one wanted to buy time. As long as enough time was bought, Yaxaron could come to the modern world in its complete form. Only a rich and overbearing veteran evil god like Yaxaron, who had as many underlings as dogs, could use a monster leader as cannon fodder. However, Duque was anxious and couldn't say it in advance. The Guardians were not so easy to fool. Duque could previously say that when he peeped into the River of Time, he also peeped into the future, but he was not Nozdormu, and there was no taboo that he couldn't spoil. If Duque spoiled it, it would be hard to explain later. It was fine now that everyone was united. After the fight was over, they would not settle accounts. But it would not be good to have a grudge between Duque and the Guardians. Originally, after Sarah showed her hand, Duque would immediately analyze it. Who knew that the Guardians would be so fierce that they directly killed 7? Awesome. Unfortunately, it was too awesome. Seeing that Sarah didn't say a word and directly summoned 8 faceless leaders in the green cloud, almost everyone, including the 4 Guardians, froze for a moment. Only Duque was clear-headed. He slammed a tiche, and the Guardian's divine artifact staff suddenly swayed on the ground with a circle of blue ripples. Duque shouted, "Don't make a mistake. Your enemy is not Yaxaron's minions, but its incarnation. Those guys have a lot of space beacons on them. Let them die next to Sarah. Explode his mother. We can't let Yaxaron come out in a complete state." You're very good. Sala, who had her secret exposed, was naturally furious. Her long hair began to flutter, even though there was no wind. Her dark brown hair formed a terrifying mouthful of fangs in the air, as if it was about to swallow someone whole. Sarah waved her arms, and a mass of pitch-black shadow energy was thrown out. Shadow energy gave the impression of coldness. However, The energy that Sarah threw out was mixed with a sense of blazing anger. The constantly tumbling black energy was thrown into the air, directly divided into 9, and shot toward the 9 faceless leaders like electric bolts. At a speed visible to the naked eye, the bodies of the 9 leaders, which were already not small in size to begin with, became bigger on the spot. Their height had increased by 1 meter, but the greatest increase was still in their tentacle arms. If they were octopus-like tentacles before, they were now like the arms of a qilin. From a whip to a hammer, the increase in physical attack power was simply terrifying. Several paladins who were originally going to be the MT jumped in fright. Seeing the qilin arm smashing down, the paladins all hurriedly dodged. Only Magni was the most miserable. After using Avatar to become bigger, his agility also decreased greatly. He couldn't dodge at all. He used his shield to block the punch, and his arm almost broke. What the hell? Shorty King cursed. The enemy's attack suddenly increased. Duque naturally knew what was going on. This was Wrath of Sala, directly giving his own people chicken blood. Although the side effect was quite big, it didn't matter if they were cannon fodder. Fortunately, Wrath of Sala didn't increase the life force of the faceless leaders. However, this was also very troublesome. Right now Duque really wanted Magni to level up, because among the group of demigods in the Alliance, there wasn't a single F***king melee fighter. It wasn't that he couldn't let Sword Emperor in, but now wasn't the time, and Sword Emperor wasn't an MT. Duque's face darkened, and he shouted, "Hodier, cooperate with me." Duque, who rolled up his sleeves and entered the arena, was naturally very strong. Originally, it was very difficult for Duque to link with Winter Guardian Hodier, just by using Azeroth's ice elemental magic. Don't forget that a while ago, the Big Mouse Duque had been entrusted by Alexstrasza to help Calegos preserve the magic Titan runes that originally belonged to Maligos. In an instant, the Ice Titan runes that represented the most primitive of the world began to dance around the 2 guardians, Duque and Hodier. The Titan energy that represented the most primitive of the world's laws only lasted for 1/10 of a second before it surged. Even though it wasn't specifically targeted at the Alliance powerhouses, the absolute zero level of freezing air that spread throughout the hall was still a little unbearable for the Alliance powerhouses. "Come closer to me," the former elf Prince Kale, that shouted, and then he released 5 spinning golden flames around him. The seemingly small flames kept circling 10 meters away from Kale. That's drawing out a heart-like area that was enough to resist the cold outside. Onyxia also knew that Duque was taking care of the Alliance powerhouses. Her dragon eyes blinked, and in the end, her whole dragon lay down, blocking the shock wave of the cold for the mortals. "Ha!" Duque shouted, and suddenly stretched out his right hand. Absolute zero freeze break. An illusory iceberg suddenly appeared in the east, south, west, and north directions. The 4 icebergs collapsed at the same time, setting off a terrifying wave of ice that reached the top of the temple. It was an iceberg formed by the convergence of countless ice elements. It was crushed into powder, instantly frozen, exploded again, and frozen again. This ultimate move that combined physical and elemental double damage suddenly forced the remaining faceless leaders into a dead end. There was no room for resistance. Under the surging impact of the ice wave, they directly collided with each other, and were all forced to Sala's side in a messy posture. Sala didn't exist in the present world of Azeroth. The ice wave easily passed through her body, and couldn't cause any harm to her. However, the 9 faceless leaders piled up around her, looking extremely strange. What made her even more ashen was that Duque had obviously found her Achilles heel. Right. As long as these guys died beside Sala, when they self-destructed, Sala's avatar would also be destroyed, and then Yogg-Saron would be forced out in advance. Smash him to death. My hammer. Torim's hand flashed with lightning as he once again hoarded the power of lightning on his warhammer. Not only him, but the other guardians, Queen Sylvanas, Vashj, and other powerhouses also exerted their strength. No. Seeing that things were not going well, Sala let out a mournful scream. Chapter 1631. In fact, The faceless leader also has the ability to make people mentally retarded. However, if they were to be brainwashed so early on, then when Yogg-Saron's main body came out, there would be no need to fight anymore. Under the powerful pressure of the ancient god, they would just leave the group to preserve their intelligence. Duque made his move in advance because he considered this point. He directly used the ice wave to gather the leader of the faceless ones. In terms of attack output, Duque had never been inferior to anyone, but those 4 silly guardians could not get close, which was a bit of a pain in the ass. Duque did not want a group of onlookers who only knew how to shout 666. Therefore, the damage output was left to Tarim and the others. Save your energy, Duque instructed in his own magic circuit. Within a unit area, there was a limit to the number of elements that could be sent from the elemental realm. If the elemental channel was expanded without a limit, it would cause the space in the current world to become unstable. The power of lightning had high attack power, and its instantaneous damage was far above that of fire elemental magic. Unfortunately, even an idiot would know that fire magic was famous for consuming large amounts of mana. Naturally, lightning magic, which had explosive power, was even more ridiculous. 3 hours of charging, 3 seconds of acting tough. Fortunately, Tarim and the rest did not simply use the elements of the elemental world. They used the power that was converted from the Titan series energy of the arcane element. In addition, this was considered half their home field, so the elemental imbalance in the hall was not caused. The scene was still very magnificent. Tarim's lightning, Freya's sunlight, Hodier's ice and Mimirin's laser. The 4 colors of light mixed together and formed a terrifying destructive energy ball. If he were to unleash these ultimate moves elsewhere, there would probably be a mushroom cloud on the spot. Then passers-by would drink their tea and say, "Today is another day of nuclear annihilation." However, the scene became strange. Not to mention the stones flying in all directions. There was no explosion. There was no sound. There wasn't even any light. A black hole invisible to the naked eye seemed to have appeared where Sala was, absorbing all the destructive energy. Every expert could clearly see Sala's twisted face. At the same time, her limbs were twisting unnaturally. A pair of thick and bulging muscles on her bare arms were twisted into a twisted dough twist. It was a shocking sight. It wasn't an action that a normal human or Vrykul could do. However, Sala's eyes spewed out crimson flames, which then turned into balls of thick liquid. In the next second, the so-called slurry turned into some kind of seemingly holy energy. Suddenly, a pair of bright wings burst through the leather clothes on Sala's back and spread out with a whoosh. Sarah had become the battle angel Vrykul. Duque had seen this scene countless times in the game. He didn't think there was any problem before, but now that he was in the world of Azeroth, Duque couldn't help but wonder. Damn it! What does the Vrykul have to do with Yogg-Saron? Perhaps the incarnation of Yogg-Saron had already begun to sneak out of Oder 10,000 years ago, and spread the seeds of nightmares everywhere. Thinking about the ancient war 10,000 years ago, it was also a group of a few ancient gods who should have been suppressed who caused trouble. Enzos was involved, but Yogg-Saron might have also used mind control or inducement to secretly add fuel to the fire. That was why the High Elves courted death. After thinking about this, Duque didn't find it strange at all. The translucent battle angel hovered above the hall. The Guardians only needed a glance to know that this incarnation had yet to enter the world of Azeroth. She was still an illusory projection. As the battle angel Vrykul waved her arms, the floor in the center of the hall finally reacted. Disperse! There was no need for Duque to shout. Seeing this, the experienced Alliance heroes had already dispersed in advance. Suddenly, all the experts felt an inexplicable fear in their hearts. No one could look away. Everyone's line of sight had been firmly locked by the rapidly distorting space in front of them. The air in the hall was completely still. Whether it was the dust from the battle just now or the smell of blood that should have spread, everything was locked in place. A terrifying radiance surged out from the ground below the battle angel Vrykul hovering in mid-air. The existence known as evil was gushing out from there. It was silent, quiet, and terrifying. All the living beings in the hall, whether they were non-living beings or not, seemed to have received the greatest degree of shock and were silent. Everything seemed to kneel down respectfully because of the horror of the one who was about to come out. A ball of constantly changing radiance from blue to green, and then back to blue, actually strongly repelling any power that belonged to the Titans. In the hall, the pillars engraved with Titan runes were dim. These pillars were once equivalent to the chains on the ancient god Yogg-Saron's cage. Now there was no longer a trace of energy fluctuation on them. Sala, who had transformed into the battle angel, suddenly opened her eyes. There was chaos in her pupils. Suddenly, Sarah began to laugh maniacally. Ha ha ha. Wahahaha. Accompanied by the ear-piercing and rough sound, all the experts felt that the laws of this place were deviating. The power of order was leaving them in fear, and the irregular energy of chaos was gushing out. It was like a power that mortals could never resist. It was eroding the entire space, as if it wanted to swallow this hall, this otter, and even the entire world into its mouth. Kalala. The mortal heroes subconsciously lowered their heads and found that the gorgeous tiles under their feet had silently cracked with Sala as the center. The floor tiles that were originally part of the cage started to spin strangely, as if they were trembling in fear. They swayed and floated up into the air. In the next moment, the air in the entire hall was filled with an evil that everyone was familiar with. Then, everyone felt that they were being stared at by countless eyes. Slowly, their gazes were filled with greed, tyranny, anger, cruelty, and other negative things. This was not an illusion. Those deformed eyeballs that gradually turned from illusory to real in midair were indeed staring at everyone. And they were also staring at Duque. Whether it was Duque or the Guardians, no matter who it was, being stared at by hundreds and thousands of eyeballs was a normal reaction. All the experts felt a chill in their hearts. Immediately, a huge existence began to turn from illusory to real in the center of the hall. A loud voice echoed in the hall, and even an otter. It was the angry roar of the ancient god, the angry roar of the thousand-throated demon. I am a lucid dream, the monster in your nightmares, the demon with 1,000 faces. Foolish mortals and guardians, tremble in my true form, surrender before the god of death. Chapter 1632. As a mutant super boss, Yogg-Saron was very ugly. Affecting the city's appearance, and scaring children, was used to describe a guy like it. In other words, all the ancient evil gods were guys who let down the audience. Previously in the game, Duque felt that Si-Thun, Yogg-Saron, and so on were all very ugly. Now that he had encountered it in real life, he realized that Daddy Blizzard's artists had really used Photoshop. The beauty camera, and a series of evil spells, did not completely show Yogg-Saron's ugliness. Its ugliness was comparable to the Cthulhu evil god. The first impression that Yogg-Saron gave Duque was that it had a big mouth. A super big mouth that was 1,000,000 times more ferocious than a piranha. If it was a human, then its mouth would definitely be the kind that split to the back of the head. The incomparably huge mouth was full of crisscrossing fangs and thin teeth. The longest tooth was 3 stories high, and it would take at least 2 people to wrap their arms around the root of the tooth. Above the big mouth was a toad-like skull. 5 senses, okay, this thing was not just 5 senses, it should be 1,000 senses. The top of the skull was densely packed with eyes that seemed to be randomly distributed. In fact, they were not eyes. They were small mouths full of fangs. The reason why it seemed to be an illusion of eyes was purely because everyone saw the evil light emitting from the 1,000 throats. When everyone saw it clearly, the ladies were the first to break down. Korea, Gianna, Elugia, and the other queens all looked like they were about to vomit. Even though Duque had secretly prepared them in advance, even though they had all seen Si-Thun's face before, they were still quite disgusted. If they were swallowed by that horrifying big mouth, there would be no bones left. If they were bitten by that small mouth, they would probably not be spared. This kind of horror at such close proximity was not something that could be endured by those who had great courage. Fortunately, one look at its translucent head, and they knew that it was unknown whether the Titan's cage was still in effect or for some other reason. But Yogg-Saron did not seem to have truly descended into the modern world. Be careful, Tarim suddenly shouted. A huge tentacle appeared. Rather than saying that it broke through the ground, it was more accurate to say that it broke through space. Even though Duque had given the order early in the morning, because the enemy's situation was unclear, the Alliance's heroes were spread out to avoid being wiped out all at once. However, this tentacle still managed to trap a certain someone. Ah, help, the tail is going to break. It broke. Yes, it was his hoof that got hit. As soon as the gigantic tentacle appeared, it curled towards the hoof. However, Imriel's reaction was not slow. He raised his shield and sidestepped the attack. Who knew that even though she was fast, the tentacles would react even faster. As soon as they rushed forward, they whipped back. They couldn't hit the hoof's legs, but they managed to pull the hoof's tail. He was then pulled into the air like a flag being waved by a flag bearer, swaying back and forth in the air. Holy shield. Ah, it's not working. The hoof tried to activate his invincibility, but it was unknown whether he was distracted or brainwashed. But he failed to activate his invincibility. Duque bared his teeth and looked at the hoof that was being swung around. Although he wanted to say that the magical girl and tentacles were a perfect match, and the magic hoof was not bad either, Duque still shouted, Coralon. At first, Duque did not intend to let the 4 guardians of Alcafon's treasury attack. Although the hall on the Stairway of Madness was not small, the space was still limited. If 8 10-story tall giants were all squeezed together, the Alliance's heroes would not even need to fight. Just avoiding them would be difficult. Compared to Alcafon and the others, Tarim and the other guardians of the same size were stronger. However, Tarim and the others' brainwaves had all been successfully decrypted, and rushing forward would be suicide. With no other choice, Duque still used Alcafon and the others as meat shields for the time being. As soon as Flame Guardian Coralon heard Duque's call, he smashed over with a bursting fireball, directly turning this 3-story tall, writhing tentacle into a torch. Storm Guardian Amalon was the second to arrive. Being in charge of the wind element, he had speed that the other giant guardians did not have. Watching a 10-story giant turn into a gust of wind and rush over in an instant, using his palm as a knife to chop off the tentacle with one hand, the shock was indescribable. The hoof was saved. She covered her tail with tears in the corner of her eyes. It was said that a kitten hanging upside down with its tail would easily poop. He did not know if Delaney's hoof would have this reaction when her tail was pulled too hard. Duque did not have time to care about this, because Yaxaron's vicious move was coming again. Dozens of giant tentacles rose from the illusion. They did not actively attack any of the Alliance's powerhouses, but their auxiliary attacks were more disgusting than direct attacks. Black Plague. The plague came to its victims without a sound or warning. Take Gavin Rad for example. Right now this guy felt that he was better off dead than alive. His entire life was gloomy. That terrible feeling was like being infected with syphilis or AIDS. Plus his penis was rotting and shortening by 1 centimeter every day. What was even more disgusting was that his whole body was emitting a glow like that of a dog, causing the people around him to stay away from him. I need treatment. Gavin Rad said bitterly. Normal dispelling spells could not save him. Only someone at the level of a bishop could help him. Gavin Rad, don't move. Kalia was rarely domineering. She cast holy light magic. In the air in front of her, a perspective image of Gavin Rad's body appeared. It looked more like an X-ray picture, but it was more detailed. If Duque saw this, he would definitely shout for an ultrasound. Unfortunately, Duque did not have time, because he was retarded. When a blue hat was placed on Duque's head, Duque knew that something was wrong. Brain connection. This is a trick of Yogg-Saron, who is good at mind control. This trick can connect the brains of 2 people who are far away, and last for 30 seconds. When the 2 people are more than 20 yards away from each other, both of them will continuously lose life and consciousness. Approaching each other can prevent this effect. However, no one had ever told Duque that connecting to the brain could allow him to peek at the other person's thoughts. In less than half a second, Duque suddenly realized that he could sense the hoof's thoughts. It's over. It's over. I've actually connected to Duke Marcus's brain. Will he punish me? Spank me? Won't let go of my tail. Sob. I keep feeling like he has ulterior motives toward my tail. Duque really wanted to bang his head against the wall and die. Damn, what's wrong with this hoof's brain? Duque's own thoughts were not too worried about being peeped at, because long before he entered the stairway of madness, Duque had already asked the system elf to open the shallow layer of the mental world's defense system. Even if they peeped, they would only be able to see what Duque had set up beforehand. What was playing in his first layer of mental defense? It seemed to be brainless sheep and gray lady. Chapter 1633. Beautiful, happy, la la la. Imriel was on the verge of breaking down. She could clearly sense Duque's thoughts. Although the thoughts in Duque's mind were a mess, she was sure that it was Duque's. She was confused and did not know what to do. Her brain was hurting. She did not know if she was losing her moral integrity or her intelligence. Perhaps it was both. She stared blankly at Duque, who was 30 meters away. Duque's mouth was wide open, as if he was shouting something at her. She subconsciously smiled at Duque, a silly smile. Seeing the hoof's typical silly smile, Duque clenched his teeth and rolled his eyes. He did not know where to start. Ouch! Ouch! A piercing pain in his soul made Duque suck in a breath of cold air. He noticed that this was a very rare form of injury. First of all, his mind thought that he was injured. Then, there seemed to be a wound on his arm out of nowhere, and dark red blood spurted out just like that. Pust! How long had it been since he was injured? Even his demigod body was not immune to this strange injury. Duque had no choice but to flash in front of the hoof. At first, Duque thought that the distance was enough to negate the effect of brain connection. Who knew? It was still not enough. F***ck. How close did it have to be? The injury happened every second. Duque did not want to go through that again. After all, it was not just an injury, but also a loss of mind. Duque did not know if a person with a high IQ or a strong will could last longer. He did not want to gamble. He grabbed the horn on the hoof's right head and pressed his forehead against the hoof's forehead. Buzz! This was not a normal sound. It was more like a voice of the soul. It shocked Duque and Imriel. Duque could clearly feel that part of his memory, that did not belong to the mental barrier, had been sent to the hoof during the spiritual collision. A portion of the hoof's memories also intruded into Duque's spirit sea. Duque quickly glanced at it. It was a memory fragment of hoof finding joy in the midst of suffering under the protection of the Drenii. Unfortunately, he didn't have the time to look at it in detail. He had the system elf seal it up temporarily. Duque immediately shouted, warning the others, "Be careful." Yaxaron would release a brainwave that would connect the two victims. If the two of them were too far away from each other, they would lose consciousness and life force at the same time. Once their consciousness falls beyond the limit, they will be controlled by the Yaxaron. Nothing is more convincing than the victim's story. Duque, who had personally experienced its effects, was able to name the skills in the game. It was more like an ability that surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. At this moment, the scene was very chaotic. The corrosive tentacles that drilled out from the ground frantically poured out messy things in all directions. There was the doomsday curse that would cause serious shadow damage. There was the cold heart that would greatly reduce a person's movement and attack speed. There was also the battle angel Sala, who was guiding 4 terrifying laser beams to randomly shoot at the crowd. However, the laser beams did not move very fast. As long as one was not entangled by the tentacles, there was a high chance of escaping. No one wanted to try the laser beams that could kill someone instantly. It was in this chaotic scene that Duque did not notice the strange blush on Imriel's face after she absorbed part of his memory. Duque did not know what went wrong. The Yaxaron at this time was obviously more powerful than he thought. In addition to the huge number of tentacles, Sala, who was hovering in the air, in the middle of the spatial crack, could actually continue to summon the faceless leader. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. These huge deformed monsters with ugly tentacles as arms pounced on the 4 guardians, almost as soon as they came out of the green mist. Although they were not as tall as Alcaphon, they were not much weaker in terms of strength. What was more difficult to deal with was their mind control special skill. If one saw these huge fellows suddenly stop moving and stare at an alliance expert, then the people nearby would have to be careful. This was a standard shadow spell, and people with low shadow resistance were often more susceptible to it. For example, Vanessa, she was hit and almost chopped off Gavin Rad's little penis. However, Gavin Rad was very skilled. Before Vanessa could make a move, he first gave the female thief a sanction, using the power of the holy light to knock her out and restore her consciousness. However, Vanessa was the only one who knew how much her sanity had dropped under the mind control. Those who were hit were everywhere, and the scene became more and more chaotic. "Those who were hit, come over here," Duque shouted. This was because the guardian of life, Freya, had opened another well of wisdom. This was the only way to eliminate the negative effects of monkey-style reduce intelligence. "Duque, this can't go on. There's no end to those octopuses," Magni shouted. He was using the Balrog's hammer to teach a thick tentacle that was swaying left and right. The blazing flames ignited the entire tentacle, and it gave off a smell similar to roasted squid, but 100 times more burnt. Everyone realized that there were too many tentacles and too many faceless leaders. Whether it was Sala or Yogg-Saron's projection, they were all illusory existences caught in the cracks of space, and could not be touched at all. When the hammer fell, it was as if it was hitting the air, and Yogg-Saron was unharmed. "We have to do something," Tyrion also shouted. Ashbringer was powerful, and a full-force slash could cut off several tentacles. However, within a few seconds, the same number of tentacles would replace it. This gave people a feeling of despair, as if all their attacks were useless. "Just wait. There will be a chance. Yogg-Saron can't endlessly send tentacles through the cracks in space without revealing a flaw," Duque said with absolute certainty. In fact, even if Duque was not a transmigrator, with his current eyesight, he could see that Yogg-Saron's flaw was gradually getting bigger. From a spatial point of view, Yogg-Saron's current method was indeed very cunning. Every spatial passage could not be one way. There must be an entrance. What Yogg-Saron needed to do now was to immediately destroy the small space channel after sending his biological tissues, or subordinates of Faceless One. This method could make it impossible for the enemy to bite back at its main body. There were pros and cons. In a short period of time, the effect was significant. The Allied forces could not fight back, and could only blindly use elemental energy. However, whether Yogg-Saron noticed or not, the surrounding space was already a little unstable. Chapter 1634. The instability of the space did not mean that outer space was about to collapse. As a powerful cage used to imprison an ancient god, the toughness of the space here was beyond Duque's imagination. Here, even if Duque had a tiche, he would not be able to open half a portal. The difficulty was so high that it was like giving Duque an iron spoon and asking him to dig through a 1,000-meter thick steel plate. In addition to the sturdy space, there were also various sealing systems for divine senses and thoughts. Even though this place was riddled with holes because of Yogg-Saron, it was not difficult to see how sturdy the defense here was 25,000 years ago. If it were Duque, he would have given up on healing and become a prisoner obediently, letting all his spirit be worn away. Duque found it hard to imagine how Yogg-Saron could dig a secret passage under such circumstances, transmit its will, and then secretly corrode the King of Wisdom, Loken. In fact, even though Yogg-Saron had taken care of almost all the guardians here, it still could not come out easily. No. According to the latest detection data from the system ELF, Yogg-Saron had already come out. However, in order to avoid direct attacks on its body, which was still in a weakened state, it should be hiding in the spatial crevice between the cage and the real world to catch its breath. There was no need for Duke to do so. Mimiron saw through this first, and he immediately shouted, "Damn it! Yogg-Saron is stalling for time." The more time it fought for, the more its strength would recover as time went by. "We must break this spatial wall as soon as possible and attack its body." "How do we break it?" "How?" Torim, who had the most irritable temper, retorted. Mimiron was an inventor and half a scientist, but it was the first time he had encountered such a strange situation. Now, the spiritual energy that leaked out from the spatial crevice should be Yogg-Saron's weakness. How could they make use of these spiritual energy balls? It was Duque who told the truth. I know. These spiritual energy balls are the intersection between the spatial crevice and the real world, the spatial nodes. We only need to remove the concealment to find the coordinates of the spatial rift, where Yogg-Saron is located. After saying that, Duque used his drumstick, a tiche, as a spear and brandished it. There was an element of coolness in this, but more importantly, when Duke waved a tiche, he made the artifact staff come into contact with the surrounding space, creating a better connection effect. Slamming the bottom of the staff onto the cracked floor, Duque shouted, "Remove it!" Falsehood. The arcane circuits in his body rotated at high speed, and the surging arcane energy poured into the staff through the circuit ports on his arm. It was a spell that was the complete opposite of a mage's mirror clone. Duque tried to get rid of the false mirror image that shrouded the energy clumps. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Wow! The difference in energy levels between a demigod and a true god was so exaggerated that it was like a natural chasm. It almost shocked Duque to death. Duque spat out a mouthful of blood. F***ck. What a loss. Duque could clearly feel the backlash of the magic impact on his magic circuit. Duque! Kalia exclaimed and directly gave Duque a greater healing. Jaina even flashed over, trying to help Duque with her circuit and restore peace to Duque's magic circuit. No, it's okay. Duque gently pushed Jaina away. When it came to magic, Duque was second to none in the coalition army. He couldn't do it, and the others couldn't do it either. Duque immediately changed his mind. Damn it, if you don't dispel it, then I'll add something to it, okay? Something that made Sala seethe with anger happened. Duque directly used True Mirror to create a few fake portals on top of the spiritual energy balls of Yogg-Saron. Duque pointed at the several illusory portals. Charge. 1 door for each person. Touch the door, and you can connect your mind to it. That's Yogg-Saron's dream. Only by destroying the nightmarish creatures in the dream can you break through the fog of spiritual energy and reveal the spatial coordinates. Finally, drag Yogg-Saron out of the spatial rift and kill him. Originally, Duque should have taken the lead and led the way to break through the spiritual energy balls that would mutate into dreams. Duque hesitated. In this life, because of his many good deeds, many key major events had already gone awry. In the original history, Yogg-Saron would give out 3 dreams, which corresponded to 3 major historical events in Azeroth. Storm Fortress Dream. Grandmaster Assassin Garona. She was once Gul'dan's assistant. Later, she was sent to Karazhan and had a passionate time with Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras. Later, she was deeply trusted by King Lang and became the most important orc advisor to the king and Anduin Lothar. Unexpectedly, under Gul'dan's control, she eventually betrayed King Lang and assassinated King Lang in front of the young Varian. This also led to the collapse of Stormwind in the first battle of the Dark Portal in history, Obsidian Sanctum Dream. When forging the Dragon Soul, the fallen Deathwing deceived the other brothers and forged the Demon Soul, and then almost wiped out Maligo's Blue Dragon Legion. Frozen Crown Dream. Betrayed by the alchemists in the Gates of Heaven's Wrath, Bolvar was poisoned and burned by the Red Dragon's flames. His soul was resurrected by Arthas. Arthas tortured Bolvar while trying to convert him. These dreams given by Yogg-Saron actually had a strong psychological effect. The 3 dreams seemed to be unrelated, but in fact, they all had the same core idea: betrayal. Garona betrayed Lang and Anduin's trust and killed Lang. Nethario betrayed his brothers and sisters and became famous as the Deathwing. There was also Bolvar. This was the future version of betrayal. At that time, it also hinted that Bolvar would betray the Alliance and become a powerful Death Knight. The problem was, if Yogg-Saron gave these 3 dreams again in this life, Duque would not believe any of them except for the second one. Because Garona did not succeed in assassinating Lang, Lang lived until the end of World War II. Then, Duque stirred up trouble and directly prevented the gates of heaven's wrath incident from happening. Therefore, if there were still 3 dreams, Duque had no idea what the other 2 dreams would be. The unknown sometimes represented fear. Duque had never been a particularly determined person. He wasn't in the past, and he was average now. He probably wouldn't be strong in the future. If it weren't for the moral integrity of the saints to protect Duque would have long since joined the Scourge Legion, or the Burning Legion. Just as Duque stood still, his companions and the harem all thought that Duque was going to stay, so that he could open the portal as soon as the dream was broken. Chapter 1635. Am I scared? Duque looked at his empty right hand. When he didn't use Song of Light and Shadow, Duque always left his right hand empty. Ever since he arrived in Azeroth more than 20 years ago, that hand hadn't changed much. Maybe it was just a little bit bigger. He went from an ignorant wizard apprentice to a demigod step by step. His experience was enough to write a novel of more than 3 million words. At this moment, fierce battles were still going on around him, but in Duque's vision, everything was still hazy no matter how he looked around. There were only moving shadows. Duque knew that it was an illusion, but he couldn't help but call out, "Aurelia!" Yes, Aurelia was the most special person for Duque. This sexy, elegant, and noble elf was an epic of Azeroth. For some reason Duque felt lost. He called out Aurelia's name, hoping to see the elf stay by his side as usual. But the surroundings were still hazy. The people around him all had lively faces and rich expressions, but in Duque's mind, their faces were all marked as blank. Windlesha. Duke stretched out his right hand in vain to grab it, but he caught nothing. The beautiful figure of the female elf in front of him was just an illusion. In his vision the scenery changed. Duque suddenly found himself in the infinite void of space. The planet Azeroth below him was equally hazy, and moving away at a high speed. Then he felt that his body was being pulled into a 1,000-meter-long rope. Was he being dragged into a black hole? Or was he teleported? He was constantly being dragged into the deepest part of the universe, and he felt like he was falling. The illusion of weightlessness caused Duke to feel panic that he had not felt in a long time. This feeling made him feel like he was suffocating, and even the last drop of air in his lungs was being squeezed out of his throat. Ah! Duque woke up abruptly. He opened his eyes and saw his right hand reaching out randomly. His angry palm was still in a groping position. Obviously, it was destined to touch nothing. Duque could clearly feel Sala's gaze. Yogg-Saron was already staring at him. Perhaps, as the commander of the Alliance and the leader of the Allied forces, he was the favorite prey of the ancient gods. A chill came over him. It was as if he had been tied up and placed in front of 1,000 mouths full of fangs. He had an ominous premonition that he would be thrown into the mouths at any time and die without a burial. For a moment, Duque thought of giving up. I don't have to enter those dreams. It's more beneficial for the Alliance army if I'm overseeing the situation from the outside. Even if I don't do anything now, this powerful team will still win. Duque's own voice resounded in his spirit one after another. There were piles and piles of high-sounding excuses. Duque almost convinced himself. At this moment, Duque saw a beautiful and valiant female figure leading the charge. Duque, I'll go first. Sylvanas, the second sister of the Windrunner family who was still slightly immature, had now carried the banner of the elves. Now that she was the queen of the Blood Elves, she had obviously thrown away all her confusion. Duque noticed that the moment she came into contact with the spiritual energy mass, the mist of the dream suddenly cleared up. That was the day of the betrayal of the Sun King Anastrian. Yes, that's right. For the high elves of this generation, this was the deepest pain in the hearts of all the elves. Their king had betrayed their own people. Could Sylvanas deal with the nightmares inside? The question had only just arisen in Duque's mind, but it was immediately dispelled by Duque. A voice in his heart clearly told him, if it was Queen Sylvanas, there would definitely be no problem. Another person entered the dream. She didn't do it of her own accord. It was more like she was forcefully pulled in by a ball of nightmare energy. Onyxia. Duque saw with his own eyes that it was Yogg-Saron who threw a ball of nightmare energy onto her dragon tail. Almost at the instant she touched the dream substance, Onyxia uncontrollably turned into a human form and was pulled into the dream. The third to enter was Tyrion. The fourth was Vashj. Duque didn't know if there was some kind of inevitability here, or if there was some kind of special direction. He only knew that Yogg-Saron didn't want to talk to him, and threw a ball of dream energy at him. At this moment, Duque had the chance to dodge. He gave up and dodged, because other than this stage, there was still a third stage. Duque couldn't imagine that if he retreated here, he would be targeted by Yogg-Saron in the third stage, and be attacked by mental control skills. Commander Magni. Before entering the dream, Duque made this decision. All right. Magni clenched his teeth. The light in front of him grew brighter, and that blurry mirage swallowed Duque whole. Duque disappeared from the real world, and entered the dream within the space-time gap. A red sun was falling obliquely on the Isle of Quel'Danas in the west. The afterglow of the setting sun was like an eternal golden light above the sunwell, dyeing half of the sky into a golden red haze. Under this twilight, a team of rangers rode chocobos, escorting a convoy of trucks along the coastline towards the revived Silvery Moon City. Servanas rode her chocobo at the front of the team, advancing along the crescent-shaped beach that had been washed out by the seawater. Her shadow was dragged out by the setting sun, forming a slightly hunched silhouette on the sandy and slippery beach. Servanas raised her head to look at Silvery Moon City in the distance. This majestic city, that had been revived once again, was her greatest pride. For it to prosper, she had put in 5,000 years of effort. In this city by the sea, there were countless magic towers that towered into the clouds. They were neatly arranged, pointing to the sky and the vast universe. A series of chocobo claws scratched the ground behind her. Servanas suddenly turned back, and her aged silhouette was reflected in the shiny armor of the arcane puppet beside her. Ah, so I'm already very old. Yes, 5,000 years had passed since the Sun King Anastrian had betrayed the elves. When the elves returned to a peaceful life, their worship of magic rose once more. The representatives were the wizards, led by Kael Vats, who had raised their heads once more. Your Majesty Kael, Vats has raised the flag of rebellion. He and the new Silvery Moon Council have rebelled. Hadron Brightwing, who had hurried over, was also old and clumsy. The half of his body that had been burned by the fire was a ghastly sight. Chapter 1636. Impossible. He's older than me. How could he? No. He's defected to the Calamity Army. Death has given him eternal life. He's even more powerful than he was at his peak. In the magic mirror that Hadron opened was Kael Vats. His face was bloodless, and there were only 2 balls of blue soul fire in his eye sockets. With a wave of his hand, he killed hundreds and thousands of elven rangers in a sea of fire. No, it shouldn't be like this. 5,000 years of hard work had been destroyed in an instant. The feeling of his lifetime's hard work being destroyed in a moment pressed down on him like an avalanche, causing Servanas to be unable to catch his breath. She still held the Solidar Stars of Fury, and she still had a large group of subordinates under her. But the old age of her body had eroded her courage and corroded her heart. A voice kept echoing in her ears. It was a voice that she would always remember. The owner of the voice was called Anastrian Sunstrider. She had snatched this kingdom from the hands of the Sunstrider royal family, who had betrayed the High Elves. Do you feel it? Servanas, do you feel how I felt back then? All my hard work has gone down the drain. All my future has been forcibly taken away. There's nothing left except this feeling of old age and powerlessness. A sense of weakness came. It was as if all the blood in her body had been sucked out. Servanas felt as if she had done this hundreds of millions of times, to the point where she was already so familiar with drawing a bow that she couldn't even do it anymore. That kind of trembling feeling of age was quickly corroding her heart. No, this isn't me. It's not me. Servanas realized that she was about to cry. That feeling of powerlessness was the most terrifying torture for someone like her, who was always determined to forge ahead. She could face the most terrifying enemy without fear, but she could not face her old self. She could ignore her old appearance, But she could not face herself, who could not even draw a bow. She trembled. Anastrian's voice was magnetic and hallucinatory. Do you understand how I feel? Betrayal is not because of self-interest. I did it to better lead the elves, for the elves to have a better future. At this moment, Sylvanas was at a complete loss. At the same time, in different dreams, every intruder was being interrogated by their conscience, justice, and beliefs. In the dream of the Obsidian Temple, Onyxia had returned to the past, and she had become an unremarkable young dragon. Her father was right in front of her, tearing her mother into pieces. Then, a fingertip of a huge claw pressed fiercely against Onyxia's back, forcing her to raise her neck and look up at the horrifying scene that was so huge that it occupied her entire field of vision. The huge dragon's nose continuously breathed out flames. The acid that had accumulated on the chest of the wings of death dripped down the gaps of the metal armor, converging into a small stream, and was approaching the young and helpless girl step by step. Shivering, she could only lower her head and listen to her father's lecture. It was a voice that shocked the entire sanctum, and even the entire world. Idiot! This was not betrayal. This is just us black dragons breaking free from the cage those filthy titans gave us. Guardian dragons. Bullshit. This damned responsibility has shackled our freedom. Whatever we want to do, we must first obtain the permission of responsibility. This is not some guardian dragon at all. We are just slaves that the titans used to watch the door. The Yaxaran gods are the original masters of this world. They were the greatest of the native gods. The titans and whatnot, they are just a bunch of despicable intruders. Look at you, Onyxia. You are a disgrace to us, the great black dragons. There is nothing to be ashamed of being the servant of the greatest ancient god. But to become the mount of insignificant humans? Has your pride been eaten by slime? 3,000 years ago, those humans were just jungle monkeys wearing animal skins. Onyxia only felt that her body seemed to become smaller and smaller, while in her eyes, her father's body grew larger and larger. He used his black wings to cover the entire sky. On the other side, Vashti was dreaming of 10,000 years ago, the time when she was the maid of Queen Azhara. Vashti, do you know your sins? It was a voice that sounded like thunder. The perfect queen, with a perfect face, had spoken words that represented judgment. Almost subconsciously, Vashti wanted to kneel down. And in the palace of Lordaeron, Tyrion saw the past as a bystander, watching how Tyrenas treated Arthas coldly. There was no kinship, no forgiveness. There was only one seemingly unattainable goal after another. No matter how hard one worked, there was no reward for completing the goal, because it was natural. If one did not achieve the goal, there would only be angry punishment. All that was on the tip of his tongue was responsibility. A kind heart, in fact, had already gradually become twisted. In different dreamlands, each challenger had a different experience. As for Duque, as soon as he stepped into the dream, he knew that Yaxaran had put in a lot of effort this time, because he suddenly saw himself in an internet cafe. Every night, in the deepest part of his mind, he would always recall that memory. More than 10 acquaintances and brothers and sisters from all over the country, forming a 40-man party. In the voice chat group, they shouted at the top of their lungs, giving commands, screaming in pain when the party was wiped out, and the ecstasy of finally defeating the boss after so many hardships. He still remembered the first time they formed a party to fight the Molten Core. They actually died in front of the 2 Molten Core giants at the entrance for the whole night. He still remembered the first time they fought the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They were stuck for 2 whole weeks. Almost every night was 8 hours of high-intensity exploration. The moment the boss fell, the whole internet cafe boiled, as if the cold tap water had instantly boiled to 100 degrees. Ha ha ha. Past. Finally killed this boss. Duque shouted wildly, raising his hands high. But in the midst of joy, he suddenly had a question. Where's my Aurelia? Where's my harem? Did you become stupid from playing games? Aguang laughed and scolded. We're playing games. Games? Duque's smile suddenly turned bitter, because he saw that in his retina, the label for Aguang was clearly Yaxaran's tentacle. Duque suddenly sighed. No wonder Yaxaron is the evil god that's best at currying favor. If it weren't for the system elf, I would probably really think that what happened to me in Azeroth was a long-ago dream. When I really believed that it was a dream, I would naturally betray all of Azeroth. Unfortunately, I can't go back. I, Duque, am already a demigod in Azeroth. With a slightly gloomy smile, Duque snapped his fingers. Almost instantly, all the friends sitting next to Duque in the internet cafe were lit up like human torches. Chapter 1637. Among his former friends, there were his roommates, classmates from the same class and the class next door, as well as people who often came to the internet cafe and were familiar with each other. They watched as the illusions in their appearances were burned. Duque only had one feeling. That's heart-wrenching, buddy. Duque was so upset that he was about to cry. However, this was a mental attack. It was a mental attack where only one of them could become the victor. Usually, it was difficult for any intelligent creature with a normal mind to control their mind. There were only two ways to control a creature with high intelligence and combat power in the shortest amount of time with the simplest violence. Severely injure its mind and wear down its intelligence. The mind-weakening spell was easy to understand. It would be considered a success if a person with an average IQ of 90 dropped to an IQ of 5. Whether it was by slowing down their thinking or weakening their thinking. However, such a method would often reduce the creature's combat ability. Without the ability to think, humans were no different from mentally retarded zombies. Yaxaron chose another, more troublesome method, severely injuring the mind. This wasn't untraceable. Before Duque entered Otter, he carefully recalled Yaxaron's methods. He came to the conclusion that Yaxaron was a super expert at dissociative amnesia. Dissociative amnesia was a memory disorder characterized by sudden memory regression. The disease was caused by great pressure or trauma, such as witnessing the death of a loved one. The patient forgot the painful experience, as if the memory had never happened, living in a self-deceiving lie. Take Tarim for example. In the battle with Loken in history, Tarim carried great hatred and heavy responsibilities, but he was brainwashed into a slave by Yaxaron the moment he turned around. This was what he relied on. The mental world was the most complicated thing. If it was completely brainwashed, one would become an idiot. Yaxaron's method was to retain a considerable degree of the victim's cognition, leaving behind his most cherished memories, and then modify other aspects. After a period of time, slowly modifying his cognition and memories perfectly, he would become a brainless fan like Loken. Duque had racked his brains to see if there was a weakness in his heart that could cause him to suffer a serious mental injury. He summed it up for a long time and finally came to a conclusion. He was worried about gains and losses. With his current achievements and the perfect and harmonious harem, he could not bear to give it up. If there was anything he feared the most, it would be losing everything he had in Azeroth. Therefore, after Yaxaron expended a Herculean effort and used an undetectable method to bypass the protection of the system elf and peek into Duque's memories, it was easy to imagine what kind of attack he would launch. Duque had set a trap for himself. If he recalled his memories of the Celestial Empire on Earth, then he would automatically activate the system elf's prompt. This move saved Duque. Ha 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 ha. Aguang turned into a flaming skeleton in the fire. Duque calmly turned around. If he were to face this crazy skeleton, he would lose his sanity every second. He really wanted to light a cigarette, but unfortunately, Duque did not smoke. After some thought, a crystal glass made of frost elements appeared in Duque's hand. It was filled with psychedelic and colorful liquid arcane energy. Since it's a dream and I can't even open my storage space, then this is it. With a strange expression that was hard to tell whether it was a smile or a bitter one, Duque raised the glass in his hand high, and then let the arcane liquid drip onto the ground. The world of Warcraft used to be so beautiful. For it, some people climbed over the wall to go to the internet cafe in the middle of the night. For it, some people wrote novels for 2 hours every day, and then worked in the world of Warcraft for 12 hours every day. For it, Some people woke up in the dark to turn on the computer during the night shift in the factory at 3 in the morning, just because Duque, the guild president of the guild, called them. Hello. XX, I'm online for a fight. Everyone had fun, played, celebrated, and been heartbroken inside. It had been more than 20 years since he entered the world of Azeroth, and that memory was already very distant. It was the end of an era, but for the traveler Duque, it was also the beginning of an era. Looking at the arcane liquor sprinkling in the air, Duque murmured to himself, "To salute our lost youth." Right. Duque would miss it, but he would not be infatuated with it. From the first day he came to this world, he had been engaged in a battle that even he thought he could not win, let alone the world. Facing powerful enemies that were as numerous as the stars in the sky, he had hesitated, doubted, and even almost retreated. But since he had never given up on the simple dream of a better life, the only thing he could do was win the final victory and create a legend that belonged only to me, Duque. Following Duke's murmurs, the dream in front of him seemed to respond to his words. The wall of the internet cafe disappeared without a sound. It revealed an enormous white jellyfish-like object floating in midair. That thing overlapped with the thing in Duque's memory. That's right, it was Yogg-Saron's brain in charge of dreams. In a sense, it was also one of Isra's most powerful enemies. When Duque was the first to step into the Temple of the Mind, he was a little surprised. Almost at the same time, the other walls of the Temple of the Mind also disappeared within a few seconds, revealing the existence behind the walls. The first to come out was Sylvanas. As the Blood Elf Queen, she was graceful. Facing Duque's questioning gaze, she proudly raised her chin. Anastrian's nightmare seems to want to use age to prove that its powerlessness and betrayal were not a mistake. Humph. I'm not afraid of old age. Even if I'm so old that I can't even pull a bowstring, I will still use my body to protect my people, even if I die on the charge. Duque was a little speechless, but then he felt relieved. Never bow to fate. Sure enough, this is the Sylvanas Windrunner I love. Theon was the second to appear. He shook his head. I met Arthas. In that dream, he seemed to want to justify his act of patricide. Unfortunately, I didn't listen. I've seen the kindest orcs and the dirtiest humans. Justice cannot be desecrated, and justice cannot be trampled on. Justice does not distinguish between races or borders. The nightmare has its principles, and I have my justice. As one of the 5 Silver Saints, Theon's belief was probably second only to Uther. As for him, Duque had nothing to worry about. Vashj appeared in the form of a human-faced Naga. She smiled bitterly. I met Queen Azhara, and she seemed to want to be my master. But 10,000 years is too long. I only have hatred for her. Also, the light of redemption in my heart woke me up. Chapter 1638. Vashj smiled faintly at Duque. Who was the savior? It was obvious. What surprised Duque the most was still the Black Dragon Princess. From Duque's point of view, Onyxia was definitely the biggest flaw in the Allied army's camp. Because she had no will to fight, it could be said that in this spiritual torture dream, her performance was far inferior to Duque's. If Theon or Queen Sylvia, who had the strongest willpower, had a willpower of 100, then Onyxia would at most have a 10. It was already giving face to Duque by not rating her as only a 5. In Duke's plan, they had to first break out of the dream, and then ruthlessly beat up the brain that represented the core of Yogg-Saron's spiritual world a few times. Only then could they protect Onyxia, by besieging the weak to rescue the weak. Who would have thought that Onyxia would actually settle it herself? The Black Dragon Princess had an unnatural expression on her face. As a creature connected to Duque's soul, Onyxia privately told Duque the truth through the spiritual connection. I met that damn dad of mine in the dream. He constantly threatened me. To be honest, I was very afraid at first. Not only did he torture me, but he also always boasted that I'm the strongest in the world. I always felt that something was wrong. And then I suddenly realized that he wasn't the strongest, and I have a master. My master had already killed my dad, whom I feared the most, and my brother, whom I hated the most. So at least my master is stronger than him. Duque laughed. Oh, Dragon Princess, your logic is stable. There's nothing wrong with it. So I suddenly wasn't afraid. Even if you want to deal with me, you have to deal with my master, Duque, first. You specifically came to deal with me, your mount. What kind of ability is that? That was Onyxia's explanation. She didn't realize it herself, but actually, her IQ had dropped quite a bit. It was only because her spirit wasn't heavily damaged that her mind didn't show signs of collapse. This was a great fortune in misfortune. For some reason, Duque felt that Onyxia, who wasn't that scheming, was actually a little silly and adorable. Damn it. In that case, would he still be able to harden his heart towards this fellow in the future, and have sex with him whenever he wanted? It was naturally for the best that everyone was safe. The 5 powerhouses gathered at the spiritual core of the Yogg-Saron, which was its brain space, and naturally triggered a series of changes. Duque understood that it wanted a certain expert to rebel and cause the collapse of the Allied forces. But to lose 5 times in a row in the beginning, that was really laughable. After all, it had swallowed a total of 4 demigods into its dream in one go. It could easily swallow 10 epic-ranked heroes, who had yet to step into the divine domain. Even with the power of the ancient heretic god, it would be strenuous to deal with 4 demigods. Despicable outsider. Despicable blasphemer. Do you think this is the end? In midair, the luminous jellyfish-like brain began to transmit a very strong telepathic message. A big move that used crazy thoughts as energy was being brewed. This terrifying spiritual energy had turned into a substance that could be seen with the naked eye. However, while it was accumulating this crazy urge, the final barrier that separated the various dreams from the Temple of the Heart was also opened. Perhaps Yogg-Saron also knew that such a weak barrier would not be able to stop these fellows, who were like wolves and tigers, for long. It would be better to give it its all and concentrate its most powerful spiritual energy to directly control these demigods. Then, it could turn the tables in one fell swoop. As strong as There's a Silly Dragon was, it was not an easy task to forcefully brainwash a demigod. If it could really brainwash them so easily, why would it need to slowly corrode Loken's mind and make him a traitor, knocking out his companions one by one and sending them to it? If it was really that powerful, wouldn't it just directly control all the guardians? Therefore, this kind of forceful mentally retarding had a huge drawback. For example, its spiritual energy would be greatly reduced. Another example was that this move had a very long time, as long as 60 seconds. This led to one result. The ideal was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. It was a big move right in front of everyone, and it was a big move that lasted for 60 seconds. If Yogg-Saron released all of this, Duque could change his name to Kidu. Beat him up. With her master's order, Onyxia, who had temporarily become loyal after being hit by the monkey-style retarding, was the first to transform into a dragon and rush forward. Without saying a word, she took a deep breath. The scorching flames, which were burning at an extremely high temperature, caused the ball of mental energy that was gradually gathering and growing brighter to flicker unsteadily. Servanas and Vashti, the two of them, opened fire with lightning arrows. Faced with a huge target that they could not defend against, there was no need for any rapid shooting techniques. The 2 female demigods slowly drew their bowstrings with all their strength in the aim and shoot position, injecting as much elemental power as possible into the arrows. Then, as if cutting through the entire Temple of the Heart, 2 arrows streaked through the void. The scene in front of them seemed to have been cut into 3 parts at once. Evil God, your destiny is destruction. Theon exhaled and raised Ashbringer high in the air. The broad blade was filled with golden holy light. He seemed to be using his actions to illustrate the saying, "Justice may be late, but justice will never be absent." The weak spatial structure showed signs of collapsing under Ashbringer's full force strike. The white tentacles that extended from the huge translucent brain all turned into ashes the moment they touched the golden holy light. The huge brain that had swelled to the size of half of the temple performed a real brain atrophy in front of the 5 people. To them, it was no longer a brain, but more like a dried walnut. When the four people looked at Duque laughed, as if he was talking to himself or mocking them. You think you're invincible? Time is indeed a good thing. You were beaten up so badly by the Titans 25,000 years ago, and you've forgotten about it. In terms of strength, you're courting death if you jump out now. As he spoke, Duque finally used the long-awaited Song of Light and Shadow in his right hand. With the divine artifact Helix in hand, it shone with a dazzling golden light, because the one who provided this divine energy was the real Archbishop, Alonce's Fail. The golden light of this divine artifact was slightly better than Theon's Ashbringer. Duque's smile grew wider. A brain is a good thing. I hope you have one. Yes. I'm not talking about this thing that only has capacity, but no practicality. I'm talking about a real brain. With that, Duque turned into a magnificent light that lit up the entire temple and slammed into the huge walnut brain in the air. At the same time, the people of the Alliance who were fighting with the tentacles outside were pleasantly surprised to find that Yaxaron had finally revealed its true body. It was no longer in the spatial rift, but had truly descended into this world. They could beat it up now. Chapter 1639. To be honest, Duque really did not know where the ancient gods got their confidence from. If they had gathered together to cause trouble like in the ancient war 10,000 years ago, the Alliance army of Azeroth would not have been able to withstand it. Now that they had insisted on sending them one by one, Duque could only chuckle. However, thinking about it, it was not difficult to understand what they were doing. During the Dark Empire period 25,000 years ago, it was the era when the ancient gods and a few elemental lords divided up the ancient Kalimdor continent. It could be said that each had its own pit, and no one could do anything to the other. It was not easy to have a chance to dominate the world, so of course they would seize it. Fortunately, this was the case. Otherwise, if a few malignant tumors were left on the planet, who knew what kind of trouble they would cause in the future? If they ran out to cause trouble during the Burning Legion's general attack, that would be painful. Now Yaxaron was forcibly pulled out from the void in an incomplete state. It looked like Duque and the others had blown up the blue cover around its body. For a moment, all the experts of the Alliance army poured their firepower on Yaxaron's huge and ugly body. For a moment, a violent storm formed by various elemental energies such as thunder, fire, frost, and holiness completely covered Yaxaron's huge and terrifying body. Unfortunately, it was only for a moment. In the next second, hundreds and thousands of ferocious mouths on Yaxaron's body opened at the same time and swallowed all the chaotic elements around it. Yes, it was like swallowing a piece of pudding, swallowing it with a gulp. This, not to mention the mortal experts. Even a guardian like Torim had sweat on his forehead and was at a loss. If Yaxaron could even swallow such violent elemental energy, how could they fight? In unison, all the experts stopped what they were doing. At this moment, a blue halo bloomed on the flat ground near them. Duque came out of the portal with 4 experts and said, "Why did you stop? Beat him up." "He swallowed all the elements," Gavinrad said softly. Bulsh *T. Yaxaron is a demon of 1,000 throats, not an elemental demon god. Duque's eyes sharpened, and he turned to stare at Torim, who was the most shaken, and angrily rebuked. "Please. You're the guardian of thunder, not the god of hammers. What are you afraid of?" Although Torim didn't know what it meant to be afraid of a hammer, he was ashamed and angry at his momentary cowardice after coming to his senses. Attack. Even though he did not dare to approach Yaxaron, his long-range lightning attack was not inferior. Rumble. The continuous thunderous explosions completely suppressed all other sounds in this relatively enclosed huge shrine. Enraged, Yaxaron opened its 1,000 mouths full of sharp fangs and let out a deafening roar that even drowned out the sound of thunder. "Your laughable magic is not worth mentioning to me. Enough. I'm sick and tired of all these tricks. Accept the end that the great true God has bestowed upon you." Nearly 10 balls of brilliance floated on the shattered ground of the great hall. Of course, Duque knew what they were. He waved a tish, and extinguished the openings of the space passage like a game of whack-a-mole. Hee. Yaxaron let out a mocking laugh. The next moment, more than 30 space passages opened at the same time. Duque's balls hurt. He wanted to seal them all, but there were too many. He could still make do with a few patches for the space, but when it came to the unstable space that was full of holes, Duke's efforts were in vain. Be careful. It's the Immortal Guardian. I can feel their disgusting aura of death. Regular attacks can't kill them. Freya shouted a warning immediately. If I can weaken them to a near-death state, I should be able to destroy them, Tarim shouted. Tarim, the King of Thunder's Titan Storm, had the destructive power of the Guardians. The immortals destroyed by his ultimate lightning would be completely annihilated, from the body to the soul. This was the right arrangement. Duque frowned. Something was wrong. From the feedback of his space perception, it was not a simple immortal guardian. If the faceless leader that appeared before was the strongest group of faceless in active service, this immortal guardian was the strongest elite that appeared once in 1,000 years. With every 1,000 years as a generation, only the strongest faceless was left in each generation, and was bestowed with immortal. This was not a simple undead magic. Instead, Yaxaron constantly bestowed the most powerful living cell tissue, constantly replacing the decaying cells. At an extremely high price, they were kept in captivity until today. In the past tens of thousands of years, only a mere 20 were left. In the Battle of Titan's Descent, the former immortal guardians were all destroyed. These were all assets that Yaxaron had secretly accumulated with great effort. As soon as they made their move, there were signs of a reversal on the spot. Whoosh! On the octopus-like face, the beard-like tentacles on top, bottom, left, and right were breathing heavily. They were larger than the faceless leader. His burly figure, which was 8 stories tall, was only slightly shorter than the Guardians of Orger. Their eyes were crimson red, and they fought with their lives on the line. One of the immortal guardians pounced fiercely pouncing on Alkavon's waist. Like a wrestling match, it directly knocked Alkavon away. 2 of the giants rolled away, causing the ground to crack. The other 3 guardians received the same treatment. As soon as 5 or 6 undying guardians came out, they pounced on them recklessly, and directly broke through the wall of giants that surrounded Yaxaron. These giants fiercely beat each other on the ground, causing the scene to become very chaotic. Logically speaking, this should have been a contest of great disparity in strength. The Overseer had greater strength and vitality, and there was nothing fancy about this exchange of punches that could be described as an exchange of punches. The Immortal Guardians should have died first. The Immortal Guardians had a rogue skill like Life Drain. Plus, Yaxaron would try to use a special skill called Shadow of Strengthening to heal the Immortal Guardians. Even more disgusting was that this skill could actually heal Yaxaron himself. Pull them away! Duque shouted. There were too many of these burly Immortal Guardians. Even Onyxia had to use her dragon form to block 3 of them. On the other side, Vashj blocked 2. Just as the scene was getting more and more chaotic, Yaxaron finally revealed his trump card. Without any warning, Freya and Hodier suddenly attacked Tarim at the same time. And the robot Visual 7 Arduin, controlled by Mimiron, poured all the firepower, including the P3WX2 laser barrage, onto Duque. Chapter 1640. No. You. Tarim, who was caught off guard, had never imagined that his comrade, who had regained his sanity, would once again become Yogg-Saron's accomplice. Almost immediately, Tarim was hit by the ultimate skills of the 2 guardians beside him. As a character who was good at wasting energy, Freya did not have any incisive attacks. She just used sunlight at the right time and blinded Tarim temporarily. At first, Tarim thought that his comrade had missed, until Hodier's instant freeze and freezing strike hit him hard in the chest. This set of skills was so incisive that Tarim, who was strong in offense but weak in defense, fell into a state of serious injury again. No. You. How is this possible? Until this moment, Tarim still did not understand what had happened. In contrast, the screams of Duque's harem were heard. Duque, seeing Duque's figure being drowned by the most powerful continuous firepower, many pretty faces turned pale. Several queens on the Azeroth continent screamed at the same time to explain their relationship with Duque. Duque was a demigod, and in theory he was immortal. But every demigod had their own special method of resurrection. No one had ever studied how to resurrect Duque. What if Duque died? Without Duque, how could they deal with the aggressive Arthas? Almost at the moment when Duque's aura disappeared, countless thoughts had already turned in the minds of the surrounding alliance leaders. No, Titan, what did I do? Freya covered her mouth in shock. No, impossible. I can't control my own body. Hodier's face was full of horror. Mimiron lost control, my mind. There's an unknown interference. Mimiron's entire body froze after releasing a round of big moves, causing the huge robot to stop as well. Everyone came to a realization. The despicable Yogg-Saron had never really let the three guardians out of its control from beginning to end. It was probably some kind of secret mind control technique that made the three of them change sides at the most crucial moment. A sturdy fortress would always be breached from the inside. Now they had demonstrated it with their actions. What was even more terrifying was that the three guardians were conscious, but their bodies were not under their control. Ha 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 ha. I told you. I am a lucid dream. Monsters from your nightmares. If my mind control could be removed so easily, I wouldn't be called Yogg-Saron. The evil ancient god let out a wanton and sinister laugh. It wriggled its body, which was like a big ball, and kept using its protruding mouth to bite in all directions. In a moment of carelessness, a large piece of flesh was torn off Edwin Van Cleef's left arm. It was a heart-wrenching blow. However, this was not the end. More of Yogg-Saron's subordinates were summoned to the modern world. Elder Viticus was an Arachne elder, who was highly respected by his compatriots when he was alive. However, following the fall of the ancient kingdom of Ankit, he also became a slave of the Faceless and indirectly belonged to Yogg-Saron. Now, as a useful supplement to the Faceless, he was directly summoned here. Almost as soon as he appeared, he used his best skills, deadly poison and Arachne plague, to increase the burden on the allied army. Not only that, but more powerful creatures enslaved by Yogg-Saron odor appeared. The originally spacious hall suddenly became a pot of porridge because of the appearance of these guys. There were giants rolling and wrestling everywhere, and elemental magic flying everywhere. At this moment, the mortals were too insignificant. Gather! Everyone gather! Magni shouted at the top of his lungs. However, he, who had activated Deity's descent and turned into a giant dwarf, was also entangled by an immortal guardian. Queen Sylvie ruthlessly gave that guy 3 thunder arrows, but it only reduced the guy's enhancement by 30%. It only made Magni feel less pain when he was beaten. Everything was in chaos. At this moment, a cold snort came from the void. Humph. It wasn't loud, but it was like a light that pierced through the night sky in chaos, allowing the allied army to find their backbone in an instant. Duque. Only Duque could do it. Only he could make the guardians and mortals listen to him at the same time. Just now, the moment Mimiron locked onto Duque, Duque's retina had been flashing with the system's red warning light. The system elf might not be that sensitive to unknown mysterious magic attacks, but when it came to mechanical attacks, it was simply accurate and would never make a mistake. If he was hit by this, then Duque could just kill himself. Coming out of the void, Duque ordered, "Pull all the immortal guardians to the east and west sides. Sword Emperor suppress Hodier. Thaddeus interfere with Freya." A densely packed magic net suddenly appeared in the void. On the nodes of the magic net's elemental network, huge shining dots of light formed something similar to a portal. The elemental emissary and the Karaji twin emperors that Duque had hidden for a long time finally appeared at this moment. The insidious Yogg-Saron was using the Guardian's identity. If the 3 of them completely fell, Tarim might call on the allied army to kill them directly like he did with Loken. However, it was this controlled state that made the allied army the most cautious. At the very least, the allied army had to find enough experts to form an exchange with the 3 of them. Needless to say, Duque really had so many powerful subordinates. Sword Emperor Vecnala's magic immunity was just right to bully Hodier. Freya herself seriously lacked attack skills, so it was fine as long as she didn't use sunlight to interfere. Thaddeus was barely up to the task. As for Mimiron, Duque saw another guardian that was different from the others. This great inventor was indeed being controlled, but this incomplete control gave Mimiron an opportunity. After he locked onto and attacked Duque, he let his huge robot fall into an overloaded state. Without the robot, he was just a weak mechanical gnome. His self-imprisonment allowed Duque to free up more powerful fighters to deal with Yogg-Saron. The demon Emperor Veclock was waving the Karaji scepter and killing everything in its path. His special immunity to physical attacks of the same level allowed him to attract the attacks of 8 immortal guardians without any qualms. It's the final stage. Be careful of the crazy skeleton's special skill. Long-range attackers, try not to look at Yogg-Saron. Such a big guy, you can hit him even with your eyes closed. Duque shouted. At the same time he began to combine Atish and Song of Light and Shadow together. Chapter 1641. The air was filled with chaotic auras. Roars, screams, scuffles, elemental explosions, and all sorts of other sounds mixed together, seriously interfering with the judgment of every master. Especially the mortal masters, they would be tricked half to death if they were not careful. After experiencing countless team battles, from the very beginning with Ragnaros until now, the Alliance's powerhouses had been growing, whether it was their own strength, experience, or equipment. But this kind of fierce battle, which was many times more shocking than in monster movies, was still a headache. The 10-story tall giant and the monster were fighting endlessly, and the space for mortals to dodge to was quite limited. Especially Kalia, if it was in the past, if she couldn't escape, she could only use, holy word, shield to hang in there. But now there was Jaina, who used the mage hand inherited from Duque to save the situation, saving many of her companions, who didn't have high mobility, out of danger. There were so many disturbances around him, but Duque's heart was as still as water. He had to focus all his attention, because he was performing a rather dangerous action. He was trying to temporarily combine 2 unrelated divine artifacts. Atish, legendary guardian staff, was a typical arcane magic staff, and Duke Marcus' Song of Light and Shadow, the spiral sword, was a standard holy longsword. These 2 divine artifacts were originally unrelated, and Duque wanted to cross the boundary of mystery and combine them. Even if it was temporary, this was also a very high-risk thing. If there was a choice, Duque didn't want to do this, but unfortunately, Yogg-Saron wasn't a simple ancient evil god. Back when Sargeras was still a titan, he represented the pantheon to imprison Yogg-Saron. At that time, the imprisonment was actually not complete, because there was still a large amount of biological tissue tightly connected to the planet, and what was imprisoned was only its core. Now this spatial cage was already riddled with holes. Even though he had just forced Yogg-Saron to the real world by attacking that brain-like spiritual core, it didn't mean that it couldn't return to the spatial rift that was no longer a cage. If he just attacked with Song of Light and Shadow with full force, he could certainly heavily injure Yogg-Saron, and even destroy most of its core. The problem was, what if he missed? None of the ancient gods were fools. When they really couldn't take it anymore, they would also shrink back. Once it retreated into the Titan cage, all the divine power would be depleted. No one doubted the vitality of an ancient god. For example, the last time they fought Si-Thun, if it wasn't for the cooperation of Azeroth's star soul and the will of the star planet, Si-Thun probably wouldn't have died so cleanly. If he wanted to achieve complete victory, he had to at least lock down its space, so that it couldn't escape. This required the power of Atish, which was super powerful and had rare spatial properties. Atish itself was already very long. When it was propped up, it was as tall as a person. With such a long staff, and a sword on top of it, the only shape he could think of was a spear. However, a staff head that looked like a crow, but was actually shaped like a chicken drumstick was placed together with a spiral sword. No matter how one looked at it, it didn't look right. Not to mention that they were two completely different types of energy. At the end of the staff head and the sword hilt, there was an empty space the size of a palm. In that small space, the purple blue that represented arcane energy, and the gold that represented divine power, were fiercely mixed together. It wasn't a fusion. It wasn't mixing. Instead, it was mixing into a ball. The most gentle and versatile arcane energy, which could be said to be the foundation of elemental magic, became extremely unstable under the influence of the divine power that was completely different and belonged to spiritual energy. It looked like that ball of light was the largest magic bomb. Once it exploded, regardless of whether Yogg-Saron died or not, none of the mortal powerhouses present would be able to survive. Impossible. It can't be done. Duque, don't mess around. Servanas turned pale with fright the moment he saw what Duque was doing. Is this possible? Tarim, who was seriously injured, struggled to get up. The eyes of this guardian who had lived for 25,000 years were filled with disbelief. Mimiran's mechanical eyes flickered with an unknown light. Interesting. Kale, that's and Jaina, the two top-level mages who were determined to break through to the demigod realm, were shocked as if their common sense had collapsed. Why did Duque only do such a terrifying experiment at this juncture? And he went all out right from the start. Ha ha ha. You can't do it. Do mortals want to become true gods after stealing divine power? You're too naive, little guy. Not to mention that you don't have enough power. Even if you have enough energy, you can't control it. Yogg-Saron opened its 1,000 mouths wildly, each of them flashing with a cold light as they laughed wantonly. Hee hee. Duque suddenly laughed as well. That's not necessarily true. There's always a turning point in everything. If you can't do it, it's just that you haven't grasped the method, and your hands and feet are bound by your poor imagination. At this point, Yogg-Saron's power had undoubtedly weakened. From the moment it had been able to control the entire battlefield to the moment it was forcibly dragged into the modern world, its power had started to decline greatly. Although it was still very strong, it was no longer the super evil god from 25,000 years ago that could only be defeated by the strongest Titan warriors. The rapid decline of its power and the recovery of the four guardians allowed Du's magic net to invade the stairway of madness. With the Titan rune array passed down by Maligos and the Titan magic formula that Duque had secretly obtained from Alcafen's treasury, he had perfectly increased Duque's strength. A huge array unfolded behind Duque. Duque chanted a rare incantation. In the name of the Titans of the Pantheon, I swear before the soul of planet Azeroth that I, Duke Marcus, am the one who brings order to the planet, and it is my duty to kill all those who are chaotic and evil. Duque's voice was not loud, but it resonated with the tens of thousands of Titan runes behind him, causing the sound of the incantation to resound throughout Otter, and even the snowy world of Northrend. Not only could Lich King Earthes, who was in the Iceground Glacier area, hear it, but even Muradin, who was fighting Ajo Nirab in the Dragonbone Wilderness, and William, who had already killed his way to Zudak, could hear it. On the entire continent, every powerhouse who had surpassed the realm of heroes or above could clearly hear Duque's incantation. The magic net became incomparably dense, and every inch of the magical network channel flickered with the radiance of the elements. The elements of the four great elemental realms were frantically extracted, compressed, refined, and finally gathered in the magic net. When the magical energy resonance in the entire stairway of madness reached its peak, a bright beam of light pierced through the magic net and poured into Atish. Chapter 1642. No, that's impossible. You're just a demigod. How can you control such a huge amount of power? Looking at the arcane energy that was as dazzling as lightning, Yogg-Saron finally panicked. The essence of lightning was the wind element. It was very difficult for a single basic element to deal a fatal blow to Yogg-Saron. However, the origin of the arcane element, the Titan energy, was even more mysterious. In front of a true spatial master, Yogg-Saron's act of hiding back in the cage was actually quite ridiculous. Every evil god was ambitious and ruthless. An ambitious person did not care about integrity. So when Duke poured an overwhelming amount of arcane energy into Atish, Yogg-Saron decided not to gamble. Its huge body, which could not fit an entire football field, actually became a little illusory and transparent at this moment. That's right, it began to shrink back into the cage. Even this state could not be maintained for long. Not only that, its largest mouth was like a huge eye that began to stare at Duque. Crazy gaze. This evil ultimate move would cause a huge amount of special shadow damage to the target, as well as terrifying mental damage. Even Duque would not dare to take it head-on. After taking this move, Duque would also become brainless. Just because Duque did not dare, did not mean that someone did not dare. In front of Duque, a holy figure opened his arms, and with his semi-illusory golden body, firmly blocked in front of Duque. The complex golden array containing divine power also opened in front of him. Alliances fail. Duque's biggest trump card against Yogg-Saron. This respectable old man, the deceased, with his noble and selfless spirit, still used his soul to protect Azeroth even after his death. He could not completely resist the attack of an ancient evil god. But with help, it would be completely different. Teacher. 25 years later, Tyrion Fordring and Gavinrad Doom, the two of the 5 Silver Sages, were once again standing behind their teacher. Duque narrowed his eyes. The scene in front of him made him feel as if time had flowed backward. That year, the 5 Silver Sages were still uncles. Although a certain Gavinrad had become bald and stronger, his original intentions had not changed. The two of them, master and disciple, were still standing at the forefront of the fight against evil. Thank you. Duque uttered a soft murmur of thanks. The 3 of them heard it. They turned their heads slightly and nodded in acknowledgement. No, I am the king of Azeroth. This world is mine. You damned guardians and mortals, don't even think of stopping me from conquering. Yogg-Saron was still shouting crazily. Every single one of its mouths opened and closed vigorously, producing a metallic clanging sound. In Duque's eyes, it was more like the lamentation of a dog. It's very ugly. Yogg-Saron, please behave like a real evil god and die obediently. At this moment, Duque's divine weapon combination, which looked like a counterfeit version of the spear, suddenly changed. The two energies that were constantly mixing and seemed as if they would explode at any moment suddenly achieved a balance, as if they had reached some secret deal behind the scenes. They were suddenly at peace with each other. The energy between the tip of the staff and the hilt swirled endlessly, looking like the yin and yang fish of the Taiji diagram. The golden holy light was still golden, and the purple-blue arcane spell was still the same. But outside the holy power rippling outside the spiral sword, there was an additional layer of mysterious titan energy. The tip of Atish's staff was a crow with its wings retracted. But now, the wooden crow seemed to have a life of its own. It spread its wings, and then its beak turned upward, gently embedding itself into the bottom of the spiral sword's hilt. It looked like the intersection of the two divine weapons was a specially made spear edge. A what the hell? For some reason, Duque thought of the holy spear Longinus. The spear of Longinus, also known as the spear of destiny. Holding this spear in his hand, Duque suddenly felt as if he was in control of his destiny. He was not the only one who felt this way. Onyxia, Vashj, and other subordinates of Duque, who were fighting the immortal guardian at the side, all felt the same way. Without a second's hesitation, Duque exhaled and shouted, "Die, Yogg-Saron!" Accompanied by the shout, Duque threw the combined divine weapon with the standard spear-throwing posture. No, 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 no. Yogg-Saron's biggest mouth moved left and right crazily. It pulled more spatial curtains in front of itself, in an attempt to escape from this incomparably terrifying spear. Unfortunately, it was completely useless. Even though it crossed an unknown amount of space, the counterfeit version of the spear of Longinus was still like a spear of light. After piercing through an unknown number of layers of spatial barriers, it accurately pierced into Yogg-Saron's head. This? Gianna's voice was almost sleep-talking. because she saw that Atish had actually acted as a booster. The real killer move still fell on Song of Light and Shadow, S head. Of course, she did not know that Duque's move was inspired by the Celestial Empire's multi-stage rocket launch system. Even if they could not make an entire space rocket, they should be able to make a multi-stage rocket, right? The incomparably sacred golden light looked so simple and unadorned that even Duque himself felt that the light was similar to the light of a flashlight. Perhaps because they were separated by too much space, even though it looked so close, no one could sense any energy fluctuations in this attack. Kale, that's Gianna Solarian. All the mages present felt a cleansing of their imaginations. The common sense of magic that they had learned for so long told them that any element would weaken. There was no element that could leave the control of a mage and cross space, or even space jump, without elemental loss. Duque used the energy of the Titan runes as a cover, perfectly avoiding the loss of energy. There was not even a trace of overflow. This kind of magical attack, that could not exist in theory, had truly established Duque's position as the god of the weave. Only this was Duque's true creation, a godly technique that surpassed the entire Azeroth magic structure. In the deep dark space, the remnants of the sacred golden light were still emitting residual light. They were still releasing residual power, destroying the tissues of the evil god that was filled with dark energy. Yogg-Saron, the ancient evil god that had existed since the era of the Dark Empire, and had lived for tens of thousands of years, was now a corpse. It quietly floated in this increasingly narrow space, its surface covered with a faint layer of death aura. This was a cage that the Titan of the Pantheon had personally created. At this moment, the outer wall of the cage that seemed to be deep in the void was covered in cracks. Occasionally, small fragments would fall from the void wall amidst the soundless vibrations, floating in the space. Along the cracks, one could see the fragmented scene of Otter. 3 minutes later, the cage broke, and Yogg-Saron's huge corpse fell into Otter's crazy stares. Chapter 1643. The dome above the crazy staircase hall looked like a void, because it was connected to another space. Following the fall of Yogg-Saron's massive body, there were also countless body fragments falling from the void. There were disgusting fragments, as well as shards of fangs that flickered with a metallic luster, and were stained with blood. Because of the spatial dislocation, there was a strange error in the transmission of sound. It was not until Yogg-Saron's body fell that the final scream full of hatred and resentment was heard. Suddenly, the entire hall shook. It gave people goosebumps all over their bodies. However, this belated scream formed the most distinct contrast with the tragic state of this ancient god. The lower half of Yogg-Saron's body had completely disappeared, leaving only the upper half of his head and most of the largest mouth. On the upper half of the skull, every mouth of different sizes was half open and half closed. There were even unknown substances flowing out of the oral cavities. Almost at the same time that Yogg-Saron disappeared, the immortal guardians on the field all stopped moving. Then, as if weathering, their bodies collapsed without a sound. Their lives had ended as early as 10,000 years ago. It was purely Yogg-Saron's evil divine power that protected their souls, that had already begun to decay, constantly replenishing their biological tissues, that allowed these terrible faceless ones to survive until now. As the core Yogg-Saron died so naturally, they also fell. At the same time, the three guardians who had once again lost control also returned to normal. Almost immediately, Freya and Hodier rushed angrily towards the dimensional rift that Yogg-Saron had fallen out of. As soon as they entered, they used powerful Titan magic to sweep away the countless broken limbs and corpses. They were so furious that the onlookers had no doubt that if there were any remnants of Yogg-Saron at this moment, they would not hesitate to start a new round of war. It was just that, it was time to end it. A moment ago, the battle on this battlefield was so intense. The next moment, everything returned to silence. This extremely intense contrast gave everyone an illusion that it was unreal. Is Yogg-Saron dead? Kalia walked over and quietly pulled on Duque's sleeve. I can only say that, the core part has been destroyed. Duque smiled bitterly. In Azeroth, the few ancient gods were all classified as aberrations. There was not even a specific race to classify them. No one knew if they could reproduce, or if they could resurrect. Back then, even the Titans, who were omnipotent in our eyes, were unable to completely destroy the few ancient gods, including Yogg-Saron. This time I'm really not sure. I can only say that in the next 100 years, Yogg-Saron probably won't come out to cause trouble again. Duque shrugged. What about 100 years later? I hope I'll still be guarding Azeroth at that time. If we're not here, we can only hope that our descendants can produce another talent, who can lead the mortals to kill it again. Duque was right. Unfortunately, Duque was still used to thinking like a mortal, and didn't notice his faulty wording. Because of this small sentence, Kalia's face was as red as a steamed prawn, and she had a fever. She lowered her head in embarrassment. On the other side, Tarim walked over. On his shoulder was Mimiran's main body with a rocket backpack. Walking up to Duque, Tarim knelt down on one knee, so that his face could be closer to Duque. Duque noticed that Tarim was still clutching his chest. How's your injury? It's nothing serious. As long as I go back to the Temple of Storms, I'll be fine after a few years of recuperation. Thank you for your concern, Tarim answered truthfully. Not only him, but the other 2 guardians, and the 4 guardians of Alcafon's treasury also came over. Thank you and your companions, Duke Marcus. Without your help, Otter would have fallen into that damned evil god's lair. Freya was a little embarrassed, but she still bowed deeply to Duque and the others. Beside her, the other 3 guardians and 4 guardians also bowed in unison. In order to express our gratitude, Yogg-Saron's collection, as well as ours, are all yours. Hodor was a man of few words, but when it came to practicality, there was nothing more practical than this. Wow, this feels good. Gavinrad was the first to take the lead and exclaim. Fighting against evil was for the sake of justice and the future of Azeroth, but mortals always needed spoils of war to embellish a great victory. Under Duque's leadership, instigation, the Alliance's powerhouses had long since gotten used to looting wherever they went. If they went through so much trouble to defeat an evil god without any spoils of war, they would probably be able to accept the result, but they would probably grumble about it for a long time when they returned. Okay, everyone take a break. Before Duque could finish, suddenly, his expression changed along with Tarim and the other guardians. At the farthest end of their perception, it was the sky above Otter. Above the sky was the endless universe. At this moment in time, the universe was experiencing an unusual change. It was a staggered layer of space. On the surface, it looked a little like a huge teleportation door that was opening from an extremely distant planet to Otter. It was just like when Gul'dan used the space coordinates provided by the possessed Medivh and Draenor to use the dark portal to open a space passage between 2 planets. In reality, in Duque's perception, it was completely different. It was as if the black hole on the other side of the multiverse had suddenly connected to the universe here. And the black hole that should have devoured everything was expelling something. Of course, in astronomy, this could also be called a white hole. Some extremely powerful existence was tearing through space, crossing dimensions and rushing here. F***ck. I actually forgot about him. Yes, he was observing Orgaren. He was an observer left behind by the Titans, an imperial envoy who came to purify the world in case the planet was accidentally corroded. In order to prevent Orgaren from discovering his crimes, Loken had modified the data. The observer would only descend when he died, formatting Azeroth so that all living beings would be buried with him. This was the big hole that Loken, whose mind had been completely corroded, had dug for the living beings of Azeroth. Although he knew that in this life, it was Tarim who lured Orgaren away, but Duque still wanted to say to Orgaren, "I bought a watch last year. Damn it, why didn't you come earlier or later? Why did you come out to cause trouble when we were fighting Yogg-Saron? If it was earlier, it would have been good to get Orgaren to help fight the ancient gods. If it was later, At least everyone could rest for a while and recover some vitality. This guy appearing at this point in time, it was really amazing. Chapter 1644. Tareem's face turned ashen. Not only him, but all the Guardians' expressions turned gloomy. What's the matter? Magni noticed that their reactions were not normal. Freya said something that shocked the Alliance's powerhouses. Letting Yogg-Saron escape is tantamount to dereliction of duty. When the observer Orgarin arrives, he may remove our Guardian qualifications on the spot. By the way, removing our qualifications is equivalent to destruction. Tareem continued. Remember what I said? If Orgarin determines that planet Azeroth has been completely polluted, he will send a purification signal to the Pantheon, which is to destroy the entire planet. The Alliance's powerhouses were all worried about Tareem's words. But for the transmigrated Duque, he could only play the role of a good actor again. He looked like he had deliberated for a long time before saying these words. What if we guys who don't belong to the Pantheon go and communicate with Orgarin, and ask him to give up sending a signal to the Pantheon? As soon as Duque's voice fell, Gavin, Rad, Magni, and the others were already making a ruckus. Even Queen Sylvanas tightened her grip on her divine longbow. If these guys were to really form an empire or something, the name of that empire would be Empire of Troublemakers, right? In the face of this group of bold mortals, or rather, mortals who had become gods, Tareem rolled his eyes. As Odor's guardians, we will decisively kill any existence that does harm to Odor. On the other hand, we have no right to stop you from communicating with the emissaries of the Pantheon. But in case you have a conflict with Orgarin, and Orgarin orders us to purify you, we will not hesitate to obey the order. Because this is our duty. Tareem had a businesslike look on his face. Duque bared his teeth. What the hell, Tareem, you're quite sly too. You speak as if you're not the one who delayed Orgarin for so long? Since Tareem was speaking in a bureaucratic manner, it was almost as if he was hinting at Duque and the others. Duque also understood. Duque raised his hand, and Atish immediately flew back under his arcane control. He looked at his divine staff and said, Our communication with Orgarin must be secret, and will never be made public. I hope that the Guardians will abide by their confidentiality rules. I'll give you a look, and you'll figure it out yourself. We'll beat him up so badly that even his mother won't be able to recognize him. We'll make sure that no one can hear him, even if he screams his lungs out. Just pretend to be ignorant. Mimiran's mechanical eyes flickered nonstop. The Titans didn't leave us behind, because they didn't expect us to stay the same. They are also eager to see changes and new possibilities. Otherwise they wouldn't have arranged for me, the creator. This was also a hint, and several Guardians and Watchers nodded in response. Duque suddenly felt a little admiration for the group of dead people from Pantheon. One had to admit their greatness. The Titans could actually create such a group of powerful creations with self-awareness and self-values out of thin air. Yet they had firm wills and scrupulously abided by their duties. Under normal circumstances, the Guardians would never overstep the duties set by the Titans. However, their wills were able to strike a perfect balance between their desires and their duties. The Titans were definitely worthy of the title of creator. You should get a platinum disc from the Iron Parliament, Mimiran reminded them. Gavinrad took it out. This is called the Archive Data Disc. Mimiran said as if he had no idea what was going on, and then refused to speak again. Duque smiled and patted Gavinrad's shoulder. Everyone understood that this thing was the key to the place where Orgarin descended. However, the Guardians and Watchers could not help Duque and the others against their own Imperial envoy. This was the biggest weakness. Everyone's heart was actually a little uneasy. Duque could not say it out loud. After all, this was quite a taboo. All right, let's quickly divide Yogg-Saron's collection, then have a good chat with Orgarin. Time is a little tight, so I'll make the decision myself this time. Duque once again acted as the leader of the Black Hand group and went to divide the equipment. All right, no problem. That's it. This time, there were no tribal powerhouses participating in the battle. They were all on the same side, so there was nothing to be embarrassed about. As an ancient god that had lived for tens of thousands of years, especially during the Dark Empire period, Yogg-Saron enjoyed the tributes and sacrifices of countless believers as a god. There were many treasures that it would never use, and carried in its portable space. With the destruction of Yogg-Saron's core, this portable space also collapsed. Duque rushed to rescue the items before this small space collapsed. This wave was actually quite rich. Jaina obtained the dagger Scar of Soul. This dagger was shaped like a double-headed greatsword, but it was actually quite small. There was a green rune energy flowing in the middle that looked like a question mark. No one knew if it came from a warrior who had fought for the Titans back then, because this was a pure Titan rune magic sword. Because it had a structure similar to arcane energy, it could provide Jaina with a large number of additional magic circuits, directly increasing the strength of her spells, casting speed, and spell critical rate by quite a bit. Vanessa obtained a Godslayer's emblem ring. This not only provided her with a large increase in agility, but it was also proof that she had slain a god. Edwin Van Cleef obtained a Kingslayer. Although the name was not nice, this sharp dagger gave him a real boost in attack power. Magni took the king's royal family emblem, without any dispute. This defensive accessory came from an unknown king, and it was stained with blood that could not be washed off. Even after countless years, it still seemed to prove that king's determination to protect his country. Most of Yogg-Saron's drops were loose items. Basically, if anyone saw something suitable, they would raise their hand and equip it on the spot. If they were worried about any curse or unsafe shadow energy residue, they could just ask Freya to purify it. It was a piece of cake. Duque also changed his equipment for the first time in a long time. At the level of a demigod, generally speaking, unless it was a divine artifact, there was nothing worth Duque taking. Whether it was worth it or not was one thing, and whether he wanted it or not was another. Duque obtained the false god's boots. This wasn't the original name of the boots. History books were written by the victors. Since Yogg-Saron had knelt, it was a false god. There was nothing special about these shoes. The important thing was the extraordinary horror shoulder accessory. Chapter 1645. This epaulette was quite eye-catching. On the inward curved crescent-shaped epaulette was a pink light shield similar to the outline of the epaulette. This not only provided additional magical defense, but it was also blindingly bright like a neon light. It was as cool as it could get. Back then, the friends who played with Duque had fought over this item countless times. With it, Duke could be considered to have fulfilled a small wish. When the equipment was almost distributed, there was only one accessory left that no one wanted. This thing. Duque saw it and understood why everyone had strange expressions. This small pants-like accessory was the claws of the conquered Yogg-Saron, and as the name suggested, it could summon a tentacle of Yogg-Saron to fight for oneself. Most of the biological tissues that belonged directly to Yogg-Saron had collapsed and died, which was an exception. It was more like a certain mighty power during the Dark Empire had cultivated a part of the detached limb of the god it worshipped through special means, turning it into a single tentacle that obeyed its commands. Hey Duque, didn't you already have one of these last time? Since you like this, why don't you take it and make a pair? When Gavin Rad said this, he was completely unaware that almost all the women present were looking at him like he was a cockroach. And then Duque was implicated. It was an awkward but polite smile. Behind his back, Duque wished he could strangle Gavin Rad's big mouth. That's right, Duque did get an accessory Sithun's tentacle before. If he took the claws of the conquered Yogg-Saron, then he would have two items that were deeply loved by gentlemen. As a result, the way Duque's own harem looked at him changed. One by one their pretty faces stiffened. Silently they all stood together, forming a firm alliance. They were clearly saying, Duque, if you dare use them on us, just wait for the harem to explode. Duque looked back with a despairing look and asked, Do I look like such a guy with such a heavy taste? The 5 people at the core turned their heads in unison, looked at Vashj, then looked at Onyxia, And then the five of them nodded in unison, clearly saying, "Yeah, that's right." The affairs of the world were unpredictable, and the human heart was unpredictable. "We didn't know you were such a hardcore guy. Otherwise we wouldn't have followed you." Woo-woo Dumuk burst into tears. For a moment of carelessness, he couldn't control himself, and now his world-renowned reputation was lost in a single day. "I don't want to live anymore. All right. The death of a fellow Taoist is better than the death of me. It's not fair that I'm the only one who fell into the pit." Duque's expression was solemn as he called Gavin, Rad, and Kale. "That's over. Now, as the commander of the Alliance, I will give you an arduous and long task. This is for you." After saying that, Duque gave Sethun's tentacle to Kale That's and Yogg-Saron's claw to Gavin, Rad. Gentleman Dumuk's face was stern. "The Alliance needs you to thoroughly understand these two defeated ancient gods, and see if there are any remaining living organisms left in the world. Or, you can try to see if you can develop a tool to detect the remnants of the ancient gods. One of you is the Alliance's most revered great paladin, and the other is the wisest Kirin Tor chairman. The Alliance can rest assured by handing this task to you." Gavinrad seemed to have received an order to immediately do a handstand, and his bitter face revealed clear despair and frustration. On the contrary, Kale That's, who didn't know what was going on, accepted the task seriously. Phew. With the problem solved, Dumuk let out a long sigh of relief. "All right, let's go have a good chat with Sir Orgarin." After distributing the equipment, everyone was elated, and their combat power increased by another level. Perhaps this was the so-called sharpening the knife while chopping firewood. With Mimiron leading the way, the Alliance powerhouses and Duque's subordinates majestically charged towards the observatory. As an observatory built by the Titan himself, of course, it wouldn't just be a huge telescope or something like that. Although it was called an observatory, it was actually more like a huge astral teleportation center. Stepping into this magnificent and huge hall, one could see many three-dimensional star charts floating in the void. The spatial passageways connecting the planets were also clearly marked. The moment they saw the observer Orgarin, other than Duque, all the Azeroth powerhouses were stunned. On the surface, Orgarin was a humanoid existence, a standard giant body, with a fluttering robe, and a clear human face. In reality, no one could tell what kind of existence he was. Because everyone could see through his translucent body, they could see the bones in his body. It was said to be a skeleton, but it was actually a series of connected lines that looked like constellations. These bright blue and white spots of light and light formed an endoskeleton that looked like a matchstick man, supporting the entire huge and seemingly light body. "Should be an elemental creature," Duque concluded. "Who are you?" Orgarin was rather surprised by the arrival of Duque and the other powerhouses. "Where are Odor's protectors? I can feel that they are still alive. Why would they allow you to come here?" Duque stepped out from the crowd, smiling as he bowed deeply to Orgarin. "Hello, Your Excellency Orgarin. Please allow me to introduce you. We are the Azeroth Coalition Army. We represent the various native intelligent races that were born on this planet, and we are here to negotiate with you. Those who could become Imperial envoys were no fools." Orgaron's translucent face revealed a rather human-like expression. "Can you first tell me what happened to the ancient evil god Yogg-Saron that was imprisoned in Odor? I can feel its presence, but it is the presence of death. I'm sorry to inform you that it has corrupted the mind of the King of Wisdom, Loken, and controlled him. Then it used Loken's hand to destroy Odor's cage, and was freed for a time. However, with the efforts of Odor's protectors and us, Yogg-Saron's core has been destroyed by us." "Oh, that's good news. But what are you doing? Why are you here? Don't think I didn't notice your little trick." Orgarin suddenly became stern. Duque smiled. He did not plan to hide it from the other party. Such a large commotion like the sealing of space could not be hidden from anyone. "We just hope that we will not be mysteriously purified." "Humph." Orgarin snorted coldly. "I have witnessed countless worlds being baptized by the Creator. The people there accepted their fate without even shedding a single tear. In the time it takes for your mortal heart to beat, countless planetary systems would disappear in a brilliant light. But until now, I have no feelings for them, no sympathy. I can't feel anything. Millions, billions of lives have returned to dust. Why should I agree to your request? Chapter 1646. Every Azeroth powerhouse was stunned. Arrogance. Arrogance. Boasting of being high and mighty. Was this the observer sent by the Titans? Treating billions of creatures as scum. Although everyone understood this logic, just like how humans regarded ants and other insignificant life forms as nothing, just like how humans felt that slaughtering livestock such as pigs, cows, sheep, and other livestock was a matter of course. After the Guardian's explanation, everyone also knew that planet Azeroth was the Titans' life cultivation ground. But it was really King annoying. Even beasts resisted the hunting and slaughter of humans, due to their survival instincts, let alone highly intelligent creatures. Observing Orgeron's mockery, it could be said that he had easily pulled the aggro of everyone present. Towards such an amusing idiot, Duque only wanted to describe him with the words, "You have a lot of ideas, you must be an idiot." Ever since the Dark Portal incident started the age of turmoil on Azeroth, the Alliance had always had close cooperation and communication with the Titan Guardians, represented by the Temple of Dragon's Slumber. For the sake of Alexstrasza and the other dragon aspects, as long as Orgeron was still a guy who could speak and communicate normally, the native Azeroth powerhouses present would not have done anything extreme to him. Now that Orgeron was courting death, Duque could only chuckle. If this Imperial observer with the Imperial sword was as strong as Kill Jaden or Yogg-Saron, then it would still make sense. After all, powerful people naturally had the right to do whatever they wanted. However, Duque knew very well that this guy's level was quite limited. If it wasn't for the fact that everyone was worried that he would issue the purification order at the drop of a hat, which indirectly bound his hands and feet, this guy would probably have turned into ashes long ago. Now the mana retroaction from Duque's left hand, Atish, told Duque that the space blockade had been completed. The Oscar winner Duque's face darkened. Orgeron, you've already completed the calculation and assessment of Azeroth? Almost as soon as Duque's voice fell, all the powerhouses were shocked. Before coming over, Tarim repeatedly emphasized that they had to find Orgeron before he completed his assessment of the planet's condition. He had to convince him to change his mind and not issue the purification order. Now that Duque suddenly asked, everyone's hearts were in their throats. Orgeron, who had light rays from the stars that formed his internal skeleton, still had a rich expression on his half-illusionary face. It's done. I am quite disappointed with the evolution and results of this planet. It had already been 25,000 years. Not only had the perfect creatures that the Titans hoped to see not been bred, even more corrosive, rotten, and ugly creations had been born. What's even more unbelievable is that the Guardians, who were supposed to abide by their duties until the end of the universe, have also fallen. Orgeron said seriously, "That's why I came to the conclusion that this planet must be completely purified after 3 minutes in this world. I've already sent my report. You lowly indigenous creatures, just wait for the Pantheon to descend again, and then disappear from this universe completely." Holy sh*T. The moment the observer said this, the Alliance experts were the first to explode. Damn it! How can you be so unreasonable and reckless? The Empress Dowager was infuriated. You decided the survival and destruction of billions of creatures, on an entire planet, with just 3 minutes of observation? Magni's beard was standing on end. What's the difference between you and a destroyer like Sargeras? If the Titans are all like this, then we won't hesitate to fight against the Titans. Sylvanas raised her Solidar Wrath of the Stars, and knocked an arrow made from the power of the stars, aiming it at Orgeron. Faced with the anger of the crowd, Orgeron showed no fear. He stood proudly with his hands behind his back. Foolish indigenous creatures, you know nothing about the power of the Pantheon. What he meant was, the Titans can do whatever they want to you. At this time, Duque stepped out from the crowd. Yes, Perhaps we don't know much about the power of the titans of the pantheon, but we've dealt with the Burning Legion, and we know that Sargeras, the titan warrior of the past and now the fallen titan of the Burning Legion, has been running amok in this universe for 25,000 years. Not only did he lead the Burning Legion to destroy thousands of planets, but I also know that he fought a fierce battle with the Pantheon back then. When Duque said this, everyone finally saw Orgarin take half a step back. Duque put the most weight on the table. I just want to ask, if the Pantheon is still here, where are the Titans? Are they willing to let the fallen Titan, who betrayed them, roam the universe freely? Or is the Pantheon actually destroyed? To Orgarin, Duque's words were not only harsh, but also outrageous. Orgarin waved his hand. How dare you? I'm the supreme representative of the Titans. You have no right to ask me any questions. Duque sneered. Ha! How many years has it been since you last contacted the Pantheon? It must be 25,000 years, right? If the Titans were still here, we wouldn't have needed to set traps to kill Archimonde and kill Jaden, and kick Sargeras into the bottomless abyss. After saying that, Duque opened his hands, and 3 magic images immediately hung above Duque's head, appearing in front of Orgarin. They were Duque stabbing Medivh, who was possessed by Sargeras' soul in Karazhan, Duque stabbing Archimonde to death in Mount Hyjal, Elun giving Kill Jaden the final blow in the Sunwell. This incomparably magnificent and soul-stirring scene made Orgarin tremble with fear. However, Orgarin, who was used to looking down on all beings, was not willing to admit his guilt and weakness. As an observer with his own will, he had long been used to his transcendental status. He would never admit that a native of a planet had the strength to beat the Burning Legion. He still argued, we can make as many of these fabricated images as we want. And how could the great Pantheon lose to a traitor like Sargeras? His disdain completely angered the Azeroth powerhouses. The sneer on Duque's face became even more pronounced. All right then, negotiations have broken down. We can only resort to force. Duque raised his hand and gave a simple order like a mafia boss. Beat him. This time, to everyone's surprise, the one in the lead was actually Onyxia. I knew it. That bullsh T Guardian isn't a good thing. Huh? Duque stared. Aren't you mistaken about something? Chapter 1647. On the surface, what Onyxia said was a paradox. She was a guardian, but she scolded the guardians as bastards. Wasn't that putting herself in a difficult spot? Duke knew very well that rather than saying this female dragon was arrogant, it was more accurate to say that she was resentful. She had been a good villain before, but then she became a traitor. Then, the Pantheon Imperial Envoy Orgarin actually said, "You're not a loyal servant, but all the loyal servants of Azeroth are traitors. They want to be purified, GG, and their whole family dead." How could Onyxia take it? Her resentment had reached its peak, and the only thing she could do was vent. Onyxia started to spit. She took a deep breath, a demigod dragon as a spitter. It was a spectacular scene. If it was in the past when she was fighting alone, she would not have used deep breath right off the bat no matter what. Dragon breath needed to store up energy, and if she used up all the fire elements stored in her body in one breath, even with her demigod strength, she would need to store up energy for a long time before she could use deep breath again. More importantly, the alliance was now strong. She had a group of demigods behind her. As expected, the guardians have fallen. How could Orgarin not see that Onyxia was also a dragon aspect that had the status of a guardian? Even if it seemed to him that this dragon aspect was a little unofficial. His semi-illusory left arm blasted out a fist of light with psychedelic colors. In the air, there seemed to be something extremely minute that was compressed and exploded in one breath. Its ferocious momentum shocked all the non-tank professions in the alliance. This punch was not simple. Duque narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, quantum strike? As a boss that leaned towards magic, Orgaron's physical attack was not weak. The attack just now was his signature move. On the surface, it seemed like a physical attack. But in reality, Orgarin had mobilized the smallest indivisible basic unit of energy in the air. This kind of power that was close to light energy was already in the category of quantum optics. This move could not be dodged or defended against such a subtle attack on the quantum level. She could only take it head-on. Woo! Onyxia took the hit head-on. Even though she had thick skin and flesh as a dragon aspect, it still hurt a little. At this moment, the Black Dragon Princess decisively followed her heart. In other words, she was terrified. Master, this fellow is powerful. After a shout, she decisively dodged her huge body, opening up a path for the follow-up attackers. Duque facepalmed. Damn it. You're so big, yet you're hiding in the corner. I'm also drunk. Duque didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Unfortunately, Duque couldn't pin too much hope on her. If she still retained her former ferocity, then she naturally wouldn't be able to subdue her. Since he was willing to be Duque's mount, he naturally wouldn't be a brave fellow. She couldn't have the best of both worlds. After all, she didn't belong to the Alliance. Since Onyxia had given up the attack zone, there would naturally be powerhouses to take over. The Karaji twin emperors immediately filled in. They were quite active. If they had just subdued him, they would have more or less had other thoughts. But now, all those thoughts had faded away. Out of the few ancient gods, 2 had already been killed. What they used to rely on was just the Alliance or Duque's stepping stone. Looking at this momentum, there would be more and more powerhouses joining Duque's command in the future. There was no lack of demigod-level powerhouses among them. If they wanted to keep their position, just relying on qualifications was never enough. They could also see clearly that Duque cherished old friendships. As long as they worked hard, Duque wouldn't mistreat anyone. So they were also working hard. This time, the one who rushed at the front was the Demon Emperor Veclor. Seeing this, Duque just wanted to laugh. He understood the Twin Emperor's thoughts very well. It was nothing more than seeing that the opponent's quantum strike should still belong to the domain of physical attacks. The Demon Emperor rushed up and used his immunity to physical attacks to take advantage. Duque didn't say it out loud. He wouldn't die anyway. As expected, those who wanted to steal a chicken would never be able to please them. Olgarin looked like he had transformed into a boxing champion. He immediately hit the Demon Emperor with a left uppercut. This was not a normal giant's punch, because the moment Olgarin punched, his entire left arm disappeared. When his left fist and left arm appeared out of thin air, he had already punched Veclor's face. Everyone could clearly see that half of the Demon Emperor's face had sunk in. If he was a slightly weaker creature, this punch might have taken his life. Phase punch. This was close to flash, allowing the fist to jump through space in an extremely short distance. It could be said to be the Twin Emperor's nemesis. At the same time, the Sword Emperor also grunted. Oh, lifelink. Interesting life form. Olgarin let out a mocking laugh. After saying that, he hit another quantum strike on the Sword Emperor's blade that was blocking horizontally. In just a breath's time, the Twin Emperors were directly bounced away. Duque narrowed his eyes. Although he didn't mind his subordinates being beaten up a little, 3 demigods being beaten up like this was a bit of a blow to their morale. Duque raised 2 fingers on his right hand. In the next instant, a huge blazing pillar of fire shot up from the floor of the observatory into the sky. The area of this pillar of fire was enough to cover a basketball court. This time, Olgarin didn't have it easy. He rolled awkwardly on the ground and narrowly dodged this attack. You are. Who? This time, Olgarin's half-real, half-illusory face no longer had a relaxed expression. It was filled with shock and shame. Duque tilted his head. I'm just a native demigod that you look down on. Duque's words seemed to be mocking himself. In fact, this was even more hurtful. If you, Olgarin, had to dodge a mere native demigod's attack so awkwardly, then what are you? Despicable native. How dare you steal the power of the great Pantheon Titan? Olgarin's voice had changed. That's right. What Duque used just now was the power of the Titan rune that he learned from Maligos. Although the system elf hadn't completely deciphered it, It had already deciphered 30% of it. This was enough to raise the power of Duque's magic to another level. Steal. No, no, no. The previous generation of Azeroth's guardian dragon has fallen. In order to prevent the Titan rune from being lost, the master of the sleeping dragon temple of Azeroth, Alexstrasza, personally asked me to keep it safe for her. Duque chuckled, quietly dragging the red dragon queen down with him. At that time, it was a matter of urgency. If they really pursued it later, Alexstrasza would definitely be the scapegoat. Hehe. However, that would depend on the Titan's ability to pursue it. Chapter 1648. Olgarin pulled up a starry curtain to block Vash's arrows while shouting angrily, "Quibble! Quibble? Oh, that's not like you. Lord Observer, weren't you very arrogant in the beginning? Continue to be arrogant." Duque mocked Olgarin as he attacked. Hundreds and thousands of Titan runes appeared in the void behind Duque. Those were not real Titan runes. They were Titan runes branded in Duque's mind. After infusing arcane energy, they appeared in the void through the system elf. One must know that every Titan rune represented an extremely complicated technique for the application of energy. As the saying went, an expert would be able to tell if it was real or not. Olgarin's expression turned ugly. He had never imagined that a native creature, that was not a creation of the Titans, would be able to play around with the Titan's power so smoothly. Akula's Balaudash, this was a similar pronunciation. Only Duque knew that it meant insignificant skill in the Titan language. Oh, insignificant skill? Then be careful. Don't be defeated by the insignificant skill of a native like me. Duque laughed coldly. Under the power of the weave, dazzling energy arcs flashed out of the void and poured down. Olgarin suddenly raised his hands, and a huge mysterious energy ball formed in his hands. The energy attack that was pouring down on him was instantly ineffective. The energy ball was like a whirlpool, causing all the energy near it to go out of control and become thinner and longer before being sucked into it. Damn it! It's black hole! Duque cursed. Black hole? Where is it black? Bulang Bronzebeard asked in shock. Duque suddenly came to a realization. The reason why a black hole was called a black hole was because it had the ability to swallow everything, even light. However, the reason why the human eye could see was because the eyeball absorbed light from the outside world. And through the nervous system, the photoelectric signal was fed back to the brain. This was the complete seeing. If even light could be absorbed, naturally black holes could not be seen. In fact, Olgarin's black hole was not a real black hole. To be precise, it should be a small space tunnel with some of the functions of a black hole. However, no one could see it. I'll give you some illusions. Otherwise, you'll fall for it if you can't see it. As Duque yelled, he used corporeal illusion to add color to everyone's vision. That thing can be dodged? Magni asked. Under normal circumstances, yes. If the enemy has some kind of destructive move, hiding in there might be a way out. I can sense that the space inside is quite stable. At the very least, we won't die as soon as we enter, Duque said in the Alliance's secret communication channel. At this time, it wasn't just Duque's elemental emissaries. The Alliance's powerhouses also started to rush over. Lowly creatures. You want to hurt me? Olgarin was a little angry. He frowned. In the main hall of the observatory, the star chart that was originally just a projection suddenly moved. Those triangular white rays formed a ball-like cage, wrapping around a transparent ball that emitted white light. These things looked like glass balls with lights on. Foolish natives, play with my living constellations. As the observer's voice fell, the first batch of 12 living constellations that appeared started to rain secret barrage on the Alliance's powerhouses. Don't look down on us. Queen Syriana knocked her bow and shot lightning arrows at the living constellations. Since they could not hit Olgarin directly, it was a good choice to get rid of the small monsters on the field. Under her lead, Tyrant and the other archers, as well as Jaina and the mages, all fired at the living constellations. Olgarin's expression became even worse. Natives, you really don't want to give up. Duque tilted his head. No, 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 we should be the ones saying that. Orgaron, please start your performance. Once your performance is over, you won't have a chance to go on stage anymore. Are you calling me a clown? Orgaron's expression became stern. He raised his arm high, and the already illusory space above the observatory was torn apart. In the void tens of thousands of kilometers away, a huge meteorite was suddenly compressed, and compressed again. The meteorite that was originally the size of a mountain was forcefully compressed to the size of a car under Orgaron's mysterious power. In less than a second, this highly compressed meteorite suddenly crossed the void and entered the atmosphere of Azeroth. As long as it passed through the planet's protective circle, it would be able to jump through space again and crash into the main hall of the observatory. At this moment, Orgaron suddenly noticed that Duque's expression seemed to have changed. Duque seemed to be saying idiot. Orgaron obviously knew that Duque had a certain level of space magic. However, at this moment, Duque did not dodge. Not only did he not use space magic to seal off the area, he did not even use any defensive measures. He was actually focused on holding back his elemental energy. What was the meaning of this? Whatever. This native demigod was definitely a disaster. He had to kill him first. Just as Orgaron made up his mind, he suddenly realized that something had happened. Inexplicably, he had lost control of this compressed meteorite that came from outer space. In the next second, he angrily looked up at the sky and cursed, "Dragon aspect Alexstrasza. What is the meaning of this? Why did you ban the meteorite that I control from entering this planet? You have no right to interfere with the observer's actions." When everyone heard this, they almost burst out laughing. Needless to say, Duque must have leaked this matter. You bullsh** T Imperial Envoy. You dare say that you want to purify the entire planet, and even say that you want to execute all the dragon aspects and guardians? If the Titan came personally, the dragon aspects and guardians would definitely have to lower their heads. They might even stretch out their necks to be executed. All of this was based on the absolute order that the Titan had branded into their souls. As long as their souls were not corrupted, they could not do anything to the observer. However, with their own will, it did not mean that they could not cause trouble for the observer. Alexstrasza found a rare opportunity and decisively attacked. I'm sorry. My and the Pentashade Dragon's responsibility is to guard this area and prevent any unknown matter from landing on planet Azeroth to affect the planet's evolution. The Red Dragon Queen's voice suddenly echoed in the observatory's temple. Bullsh** T. I am the observer. That is my. Alexstrasza interrupted him. If I say that it is dangerous, then it is dangerous. If you want to relieve me of my responsibility, let the Titan personally give the order. This time, the Red Dragon Queen was going all out. Chapter 1649. He had seen idiots before, but he had never seen such an idiot. Duque had seen many people who thought they were tigers, but he had never seen someone like Orgaron. Looking at Orgaron's angry and helpless face, Duque really wanted to tell him that the master behind him was already a 25,000-year-old pickled cabbage. Oh, it was the super daylily, long gone cold. With great difficulty, Duque managed to restrain himself. After all, at the time of Return of the Legion, mortals still needed the Titans in their soul form to level up. Now that he had offended the Titan, although he wouldn't be looking for trouble in the future, it was still a lose-lose situation. However, Duque did not mind teaching Orgaron a lesson. Without the cosmic bash, Orgaron was like a tiger that had its fangs pulled out. At least he was still a threat, but that was all he could do. The Red Dragon Queen's actions represented the attitude of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. This was definitely a big boost for the Allied army. Of course, Duque would not let go of the opportunity to stab them in the back. Everything that happened here was broadcasted live by Duque to Taurine, Alcaphon, and the others. Seeing the excitement on their faces, Duque knew he had achieved his goal. At this moment, He really wanted to give Algalon a certificate of merit, because this arrogant imperial envoy had almost forced all the strong players in Azeroth to work together, regardless of whether they were righteous or neutral. Oh! Magni, who was in his God's Descent state, raised the enlarged Balrog's hammer and stomped hard on the ground. His huge body was like a flying gourd as he leaped over to attack. Olgren frowned. Of course, he realized that this native mortal had the power of a demigod. Frowning slightly, he raised his arm and took Magni's hammer head-on. The terrifying fire element bloomed on his arm and collided with the Titan's energy that was wrapped around his arm without any room for maneuver. Just based on this attack alone, Magni was undoubtedly at a disadvantage. But now they had the advantage in numbers. So what if they used up a lot of energy? When Orgaren paid the price of weakening his power and unleashed 5 consecutive phase punches in one go, activating the special effect phase ram of this set of skills, sending Magni directly into a small space rift nearby, which was a mini black hole. The Karaji twin emperors rushed over again. Not only that, Duque used his left hand to gather the elements of the weave and poured a large amount of arcane energy into a tiche, giving Olgren a knockoff version of Excalibur. To put it bluntly, it was just a highly concentrated arcane light cannon. However, for the sake of showing off, a certain someone yelled Yex Curry Stick, which was the name of the move that no one could understand. Olgren might be able to take on the attacks of other strong fighters. Olgren did not dare to take on Duque's attack carelessly. He opened up a small black hole and performed a short-distance space jump that was similar to Flash. Humph! There was no end to it. Enough! It's really enough. All of you who are filthy and go against the will of the Supreme Pantheon Titan shall be purified here. Olgren's illusory body emitted the brightest light since the start of the battle. His outer outline became more and more transparent, and the stars that made up his internal skeleton and the light that connected these stars became more and more dazzling. As the light grew brighter, his huge body slowly rose into the air. He's using an ultimate move, Theon shouted, almost subconsciously activating his holy shield. However, the next moment, the Empress Dowager realized that she could not hold on any longer. This kind of terrifying attack was definitely not something that the holy shield that he had condensed with his mere spiritual energy could block. In the face of a higher level of mysterious power, the Holy Knight's invincibility was nothing but a joke. On the surface, Duque was fighting with Olgren for control of the surrounding space, and he was still accumulating mana to attack Olgren. In fact, the drama queen Duque was already acting. Hide in his black hole. Almost every evil master had an ultimate move that could kill people instantly. If they could not dodge it, they would be dead. The well-trained Alliance masters quickly gave up on their targets and rushed into the black hole's devouring range. Under normal circumstances, being sucked in would definitely be fatal. When Duque rushed in with a tiche in hand, everyone was shocked to find that the black hole, which looked like the stomach of some creature, had stabilized. Only a few small black balls of light swam in the space. Don't touch the dark matter. Actually, even without Duque's reminder, everyone would instinctively avoid these things. With Duque's reminder, everyone was just more careful. The experts of the Alliance entered. Vashj returned to her human form and entered. Even Onyxia in her human form rolled in. Outside the field, looking at the empty observatory hall, Olgren was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He had used the ultimate move Big Explosion to clear the field. He had even prepared a backup plan to destroy the space rift that Duque had dug out. Who knew that Duque would use the small black hole he had summoned to hide? Even if it was only for a short while, it was enough. The process of energy deposition was very difficult to reverse. It was just like after a nuclear reaction started. It was impossible to stop it immediately. It could only slowly cool down and slow down until it finally calmed down. On the field, not all the enemies had run away. The Karaji twin emperors and a few elemental emissaries were still attacking Olgren. However, those with a bit of eyesight could see that the Gemini and the others were already gone. Their souls had returned to the magic net. Here, it was just an energy body that was controlled by them and had the same appearance as them. Damn! Algren's ultimate move finally exploded. Originally, it should have been a terrifying explosion like a nuclear explosion. Under the double effects of Algren's conscious retraction and the space lock that Duque had set up earlier, although Big Explosion was powerful, it did not even shatter the observatory that had been strengthened by the Titan rune sequence. The smoke and dust from the explosion was quickly swept away by a storm. When Olgaren saw the Azeroth Masters led by Duque standing in front of him unscathed, the Lord Observer's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Duque had an extremely confident smile on his face. He curled his lips and said, "Do you have any other moves, Lord Observer? If not, I have a song for you." The name of the song is Cold. Behind Duque, there was a group of animals with an aggressive aura. Chapter 1650. Without waiting for Orgaren to explode his small black hole and force the strong ones out, everyone had already rushed out and swarmed him. Onyxia once again took the lead with a dragon, but Vash's lightning magic arrived first. When a lightning snake as thick as a one-way street directly struck Algaren's body, the explosive lightning energy directly caused the observer to grimace in pain. Only at this moment did the Black Dragon Princess's attack connect perfectly and arrive straight at him. She did not take a deep breath like her signature move. Instead, she swung her tail in a large way that was close to drifting. The dragon's entire body came to a sudden stop 15 meters in front of Orgaren. Then, the huge tail that was as thick as the pillar of the temple drew a golden arc in the air and smashed into Orgaron's left neck. Ugh! Even with his special constitution, Orgaren, whose body was half real and half intangible, was at a great disadvantage under the Black Dragon Princess tail attack that was filled with highly concentrated fire elements. His face was distorted due to the pain, and it perfectly portrayed the sorrowful cry that should have been loud in his heart. In the next moment, his entire body was smashed into the air. The high-purity fire elements that were released made him look like a huge torch that fell from the sky. The light from the fire illuminated the hall and reflected on the faces of all the strong ones in Azeroth. Without giving him a chance to catch his breath, Sword Emperor Vecnalas pressed forward and swung his Karaji Emperor sword in a counterattack that was almost like an uppercut. In the end, it left a deep wound on his chest. It looked like an illusory and useless wound, but the Nephilim Emperor Vecnalas, who was connected to the Sword Emperor, immediately pounced forward and shot a shadow arrow at the wound. This was a demigod attack. If it was calculated according to the levels in the game, this was at least a level 50 shadow arrow. It was not a terrifying damage that the players at the current stage could deal. The Nephilim Emperor immediately pushed away after using his full strength, and a translucent figure appeared in his empty spot. It was Duque's subordinate, the chief of the Weave Khadgar. He existed as a pure spirit, and he had broken through with it. With no hope of reviving, Khadgar focused on training. With his authority in the Weave that was second only to Duque, Khadgar's current strength was above Jaina and Kael'thas. Without using any staff or weapons, Khadgar thrust his illusory arms directly into the gaping hole in Algaren's chest. Bright purplish-blue veins of the weave extended out from the void, converging on Khadgar's hands like rivers flowing into the sea. Then, they crashed into Algaren's body like a tidal wave. Aha! Orgaron's huge and illusory body trembled as he screamed. Bastard native! Do you think that you will be forgiven for your actions? Forgiven? Duque's voice suddenly rose an octave. We did nothing wrong, why should we be forgiven? We protect our world, and at the same time, attack the enemies of the Titans of the Pantheon. I stabbed Sargeras, stabbed Archimonde, lured Kil'jaeden to death, and even Thun and Yogg-Saron, who the Titans wanted to get rid of but didn't dare to, were all killed by us. What a joke. I just want to ask, we were wrong. In heaven. Inside. Orgaren was speechless. At this point, how could he not know that he was wrong? If Azeroth was a planet with only primitive single-celled organisms, there wouldn't be any protests from the natives, even if he destroyed 100 million of them. Because those organisms only had survival instincts, they wouldn't have the concept of a world. Azeroth was different. It was a world with a large number of highly intelligent organisms, and the strongest among them had evolved to the point where they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Guardians created by the Titans. As an observer, Orgarin determined that this planet was heavily polluted and needed to be purified and destroyed based on the one-sided data. He ignored the series of efforts made by the natives and mortals. This meant that he was destined to stand on the opposite side of these strong natives. How could he not know that he was going to lose this fight? Subconsciously, the words "run away" appeared in his mind. Unfortunately, he couldn't do it well. "Hey, you want to leave so soon? You can leave if you want, but please leave a correct evaluation for our planet first." That was what Duque said, but doing it was another matter. On his right hand, the Song of Light and Shadow exploded with the brightest golden holy light so far. Duke's entire body turned into an arrow of light, crashing towards Orgarin. An even bigger energy impact was produced. At that moment, the entire observatory, older, and even the entire world seemed to have darkened. All the strong ones could see was a golden light, so bright that they couldn't look at it directly. The most dazzling golden light ball suddenly exploded in all directions with Orgaron's right shoulder as the center. After that, a dazzling golden light covered the heavens and the earth and enveloped everything. There was no sound of explosion, but it felt as if they were thrown into a vacuum. Therefore, the holy and glorious golden world suddenly became quiet. The holy light wave instantly swept through everything. The first to be affected was Orgaron's activated constellations, and these high-energy bodies were instantly turned into ashes. Unexpectedly, none of the strong ones from the Alliance were affected by the golden light. It was unknown if it was because Duque had precise control over his power, or because the holy light would not hurt them in the first place. No one died because of it. The light slowly dissipated, and when everyone's vision returned to normal, they saw Orgarin lying on the ground like a dead dog. Duque had one foot on Orgaron's chest, and the spiral sword in Duque's right hand had a long golden light extending out. After the golden light pierced through Orgaron's chest, it suddenly split into two. Like tree roots, it wrapped around an illusory heart that was still beating rhythmically. "You, what are you doing?" "I'm an observer from the Pantheon." "Ah." Everyone saw Duque's right hand clench, and the golden light was like a claw that fiercely scratched Orgaron's illusory heart. The pain caused Orgaron's entire body to curl up. Duque had a righteous look on his face. He looked like the combination of all the righteous heroes in history. Unfortunately, what he said was completely different. All intelligent beings in the Azeroth respect the Pantheon, but that doesn't mean we will accept unfair treatment. We only hope that you can revise your report and pass the truest information to the Titans. After saying that, the magic mirror that appeared above Duque's head played the heroic team's achievements one by one. After defeating the Burning Legion, they defeated the Scourge Army and the ancient evil god. Chapter 1651. I. Orgarin's mouth moved for a long time, but he couldn't say anything. Before Duque could do anything, the guys below started to make a ruckus. Gavinrad shouted, "Boss, do it. There's no point in keeping this scourge alive. We'll go down the crazy stairs and pull out two of Yogg-Saron's teeth. We'll just kill him and blame it on Yogg-Saron." Beside Gavinrad, Irel's mouth was wide open. She really wanted to ask if this first-generation Holy Knight, who was known as one of the 5 Silver Sages and had a high status in the Alliance, was a fake? Or was his conscience eaten by a dog? Gavinrad winked at her, and Hoof didn't know what to do. Gavinrad wasn't stupid, and the others were good actors too. Wasn't it just acting? Who wouldn't? Magni shouted. "We, the beings of Azeroth, are fighting on the front lines against the Burning Legion. This guy claims to be an emissary of the Pantheon, but he wants to do what the Burning Legion has been trying to do for 10,000 years. Destroy Azeroth. Could this guy actually be an accomplice of the fallen Titan Sargeras?" Orgarin's body trembled when he heard this. His power came from the Pantheon. Without the Titans, he was just a stronger fighter. In front of giants like the Pantheon or Sargeras, he was nothing. The label of traitor was too heavy. He couldn't afford to bear it. How can you slander me like this? Before Olgren could finish, Duque pinched his heart again. His soul trembled in pain. Queen Sylvie put her hands on her hips and leaned on her divine longbow, looking majestic. Don't talk nonsense with him. Anyone who tries to destroy Azeroth is our enemy. Kill him. I still need a few divine weapons. As soon as she said this, Olgren was shocked to find that the mortals were looking at him with burning eyes. It was desire. It was greed. It was the victors declaring their possession of the losers' belongings. The group of people repeatedly glanced at him with blazing eyes that were like volcanic eruptions. It was as if they were discussing how to slaughter this pig, not how to deal with the noble emissary of the Pantheon. Olgren shivered and shrank back. In the end, it was because he was too arbitrary. Since he really had the strength to defeat the Burning Legion's bosses and kill the ancient evil god, he would receive the corresponding respect even in the Pantheon. Coupled with the dragon aspect's complaint, even if he brought the case to the Pantheon temple, he might still be at a disadvantage. Most importantly, he really hadn't seen the Titans for 25,000 years. This was what he felt the most guilty about. All right, I'll rewrite my report, so please let me go first. Olgren tried to remain calm. Rewrite. There was no need to go through so much trouble. I'll give you a script, and you can just read it. With that, Duque actually took out a glittering script written in the Titan language. What is this? Olgren was even more afraid now. This is the report line of Lord Olgren, who was moved by the courage of mortals and their love for life. Duque spouted nonsense with a straight face. Duque's subordinates and the group of Alliance powerhouses all burst out laughing. Move my ass. It was obvious that they had been forced by these greedy and capable Azeroth players. On the other side, Olgren almost exploded in anger. If it wasn't for Duke giving him a hard kick to make him realize his position and situation, he might have really flipped out like an idiot. Read it. Duque was obviously saying, please start your performance. Olgren trembled, and his originally translucent blue face seemed to become even more transparent. I've witnessed countless worlds being baptized by the Creator. The people there accepted their fate without even shedding a single tear. In the time it takes for a mortal's heart to beat, countless planetary systems would disappear in a brilliant light. But until now, I don't have the slightest bit of emotion or sympathy for them. I can't feel anything. Millions, billions of lives turn to dust. If they had your tenacity and unyielding spirit, if they had your passion for life, the result might have been very different. Perhaps it's your imperfections that allowed you to have free will, allowing you to face everything that seems to be accidental. You've done what the Titan's perfect creation could not do. You've defeated the Burning Legion's attack, defeated the ancient evil god's counterattack, and protected this world from the violent elemental lords and dark forces. I've rewritten the reply message. Your planet will be spared. I can no longer blindly believe in my own calculations. I've suffered the final backlash of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. I'm heavily injured and lack the strength to send this message. You'll have to work hard, find a place with sufficient energy, close to the sky, and send my message back to the Pantheon. When Olgren finished reading the entire report, he looked at Duque, who looked like he had finished recording. He had completely lost his temper and collapsed on the ground like a dead dog. His ashen face was filled with despair. You're not a Titan's creation. How did you learn such complicated Titan language? Hehe. Is it complicated? Alright, I guess it's complicated. Even with my intelligence, it took me a whole month to understand it. Dumuk accidentally showed off again. Jaina looked at him with eyes that were filled with fanatical admiration. After all, even the simplest Titan rune contained small runes that could easily lead to hundreds of millions of different permutations and combinations, triggering different effects. Duque claimed that he only took a month to understand it. What was he if not a god? Olgren was so shocked that he could not speak. I used nearly 1,000 years. But the observer quickly came to his senses. I've already done as you said. What are you going to do with me? Are you going to kill me? Kill you? No, no, no. How is that possible? You're a noble emissary of the Pantheon. How can a native like me do anything to you? Duque said righteously. He did not even look at who was rubbing mud on the other person's chest. We have a common enemy with the Pantheon, Sargeras and his Burning Legion. So we're natural allies. In order to prevent the Pantheon Titan from finding the way to Azeroth, I hope that the Observer can come to my wizard tower for a while, set up a space beacon, and understand the situation in Azeroth. Chapter 1652. Olgren rolled his eyes. He did not believe a single word that Duque said. So what if he objected? He was the meat on the chopping block. Duque could do whatever he wanted to him now. Moreover, he had offended all the dragon aspects and guardians of Azeroth. Even if he screamed his lungs out, no one would come to his rescue. Olgren did not say anything. He accepted his fate. Down below, Imriel was stunned. She murmured, I suddenly understand why Duke Marcus is the leader of the Alliance. Of course. Alucia and the other queens puffed out their chests proudly. Duque could be the leader because he could lead the Alliance to victory after victory, and because he could push the Alliance, and even the world forward. At the same time, most importantly, Duque would always stand on the side of the Alliance, seeking the greatest benefits for the Alliance, and moving towards the brightest future. This was the core reason why no one dared to challenge Duque's leadership, ever since he took over the leadership of the Alliance from the dead Turinas. The outcome was set, and Olgren could no longer act tough. Shrink. With a command from Duque, Olgren shrunk to the size of a human. If he put on a wizard robe and a hood, no one would be able to tell that he was not a human at all. In the magical communication network, Tyrion, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly asked, Is it appropriate? It sounded like a random question, but everyone knew what Tyrion was asking. Tyrion had never been the head of a country. At best he was a general in name. However, his special status meant that his words could not be ignored. Duque pondered for a moment, and finally said tactfully in the communication channel dedicated to the leader of the Alliance. Actually, when I returned to the ancient war, I had already found a large number of relics from the Pantheon when I sneaked into the Twisted Nether. I even found some footage of Sargeras attacking the Pantheon. Unfortunately, the elemental interference there was very strong, and many laws did not apply. I could only use dark energy at that time, so I could not record the footage. When Duque said that the entire magic network was dead silent, as if nobody was listening at all, after a long time, Theon finally managed to squeeze out a sentence. Are the Titans all dead? I can only say, it's very likely, yes. At the very least, it was the destruction of the physical body. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how the Burning Legion could run amok in the universe for 25,000 years. However, the Titans are powerful and great. I believe that they are still hiding in some corner of the universe's souls, or in some special state, quietly waiting for an opportunity. At that, Duque's voice became impassioned and clear. I believe that planet Azeroth, which has nurtured countless intelligent life, has a decisive force or opportunity that could change the fate of the war against the Burning Legion. Otherwise, there's no way to explain why the Burning Legion would never forget Azeroth in the past 10,000 years. Even Sargeras didn't hesitate to use possession to infiltrate this place. I believe that our homeland will very likely become the battlefield for the final battle against the Burning Legion. Therefore, for the continuation of our race, for the continuation of our civilization, the burden on our shoulders is very heavy, and our mission can be said to be arduous and long. I believe that when the Titans discover everything here, they will not hesitate to cross the distant interstellar space, to come to Azeroth, and fight side by side with us. Just like what we have been doing with the Sleeping Dragon Temple and the Watchmen. So please don't worry. Continue to fight for the future of Azeroth. Good. Theon was the first to cheer. Then, it was Duque's harem, Magni, Varian, and the alliance leaders of the online alliances who all cheered in unison. Olgren didn't understand what was going on with the group of mortals around him. He couldn't understand why they suddenly became so outstanding and excited. It's okay. I just announced to them that the Pantheon will still stand on the same side as us against the Burning Legion, Duque said casually. Olgren was stunned at first, but then he nodded helplessly. He didn't know much about the war when Sargeras rebelled. After Sargeras raised the flag of rebellion, he was sent to the distant depths of the universe to carry out orders. As an observer, his mission was incomparably heavy. The number of planets in the universe that could support life basically corresponded to the number of Titan's footprints. Even if 1/10,000th of the planets were in trouble, it would be enough to make him busy. When he came to his senses, he was shocked to realize that it had been a long time since he received any communication from the Pantheon. It was purely the duty that was imprinted in his mind that drove him to go on interstellar journeys again and again. Is there anything else you want me to do? Olgren asked with his head lowered. Speaking of which, there is. Duque's smile became mysterious. Soon, Duque brought the captive Olgren to the stairway of madness. First, he made him witness the death of Yogg-Saron's core biological tissue, and then introduced him to the four guardians of Odor. This scene was naturally extremely awkward, because the four guardians all knew that Olgren's first report was to impeach them for dereliction of duty. He requested the Pantheon to cleanse Azeroth and destroy them as well. Torim and Hodier, who had a slightly bad temper, looked at Olgren as if he was their enemy. If it wasn't for the Guardians' restriction that forbade them from attacking the Observer, they would probably have beaten Olgren up. The four Guardians of the Alcaphon treasury had a similar attitude. Freya, who had a good temper, also didn't give Olgren a good look. Only Mimirin's electronic eyes flashed, and no one knew what this mechanical dwarf was thinking. Fortunately, the main point now wasn't for Olgren to hold hands with these guardians and become good friends again. But these? What are these? Duque took out a large pile of fragments of different shapes and sizes and placed them in front of Olgren, asking even though he already knew the answer. Some of these fragments looked like yellow bronze pieces, and some looked like broken pieces of green glass lamps. The only thing they had in common was the faint aura of life that emanated from them. This should be a life element divine artifact, Freya said with certainty. Olgren's voice seemed to be a little dry. If I'm not wrong, this should be Valinor. Valinor? That Valinor? Olgren's answer evoked a distant memory of Freya. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.